Originally, I planned this video to just talk about the first Thief game. In the last video, I even said that's what I was going to do. But change of plans. My passion for this series took over, and now I'm covering the entire Thief trilogy, and even some stuff made by the fanbase. For those of you who just want to skip around or hear me only talk about a specific thing, there are timestamps in the description. Something disheartening about the passage of time is all the amazing art people forget about, and new generations just simply aren't aware of. For example, and I don't want to shame this person, they're really nice, they're friendly, we talk quite a bit, and not knowing games isn't a sin or anything. But a few months ago my heart sank when I was in Discord, and I mentioned how Dishonored was inspired by Thief. You know, this is a pretty obvious statement that you'd expect no pushback from. Yet this person in the server responded that Thief came out a couple years after Dishonored. They were thinking that I was talking about the middling reboot from 2014, not knowing that it was a reboot of anything. It's been a while, but I still think about this because Thieforith, as it's otherwise known, was a game with very little impact anywhere. But the Thief series beforehand, this was beloved for all its innovation and near-perfect game design, and it still feels fresh over 24 years later. Developed by Looking Glass Studios, a company that previously was most well known for Ultima Underworld and System Shock. The first Thief game, subtitled The Dark Project, graced the world in late 1998 as a PC exclusive. And boy was it one. It has unintuitive controls, so the first thing you have to do is rebind everything. Well, actually, the first thing you do is install a small fix. This game is quite old and it doesn't run well on modern operating systems, and it will also help you rebind everything. There's a few little glitches that happen with just the regular vanilla game that you will get on Steam. It is better on GOG, but even that version needs some updating because it's using an old version of the fix. This game saw a release the following year, renamed to Thief Gold. It's a sort of definitive edition, with lots of small fixes, and it also includes 3 new missions. One of which is good, and, it's a slightly stinky definitive edition, but overall I enjoy the changes even if I hate my existence during one mission in particular. The following year after that, we saw Thief 2, one of the best game sequels of all time, and just flat out one of the best games full stop. Although the studio was crunched to hell and back with a horrible development cycle, and then the studio had to shut down because its publisher Eidos was running low on money. It's a shame that such a monumental studio had to die, but that's the beauty of capitalism. At least the Thief series got one more outing in its original continuity, with 2004's Thief Deadly Shadows, the only non-Deus Ex game to be made by Ion Storm Austin. A fitting conclusion given that the studio was Warren Spector's and he even worked at Looking Glass before going to Deus Ex. And while the third Thief game was considered a black sheep for years, it's still a game that I enjoy. It's pretty good. It's just that it falls flat in comparison to the 2 previous games. It's especially fitting that Ion Storm Austin did this, because Deus Ex Invisible War is also a pretty decent game that had the exact same fate. When PC gamers of a certain era complained that consoles were ruining everything, these were 2 of the most prominent examples you'd hear for a long time. The game's scope had to shrink and it had to fit onto the original Xbox, compromises and all. So Deus Ex 2 and Thief 3 weren't as good as the previous games that everyone loved. And truly this is crushing because the original games were unparalleled in complexity. But now that it's been a long time and everything is so standard, even a 7-year-old handheld can run modern blockbusters with an asterisk. This argument has now derailed into games being slightly less pretty now because of consoles, and how the 6-year-long development with immense amounts of crunch should have actually been longer and tougher, because we can't see every single follicle on that person's photorealistic skin. Whoops, I got carried away complaining about the industry and certain people within it. Let me get back to a time where I complain about the industry from 10 years ago instead. A decade after Thief Deadly Shadows, we were handed Thief 4, a game that's best feature was the initial test name they used during the announcement, and sadly it didn't make it to release. So the 2014 game, simply titled Thief, is, well, it burned a lot of bridges with the fanbase, and there were a myriad of reasons, and I don't want to get into it all, so I'll just make myself sadder. The game was basically a series of hallways interrupted by an open world. Your hands are always in front of you, and animations take a long time. There's button mashing sessions to open up windows, which isn't fun. And what if we just had third-person climbing segments where all we do is follow a straight line? And to top it off, we got detective vision, because of course we did. It's just following a series of waypoint markers because nothing is allowed to stand out in a game that forgot most colours actually exist. Oh, it seems I did want to make myself sad. That being said, I know the devs actually cared about the game, at least initially. They weren't trying to butcher it or anything. It's just the gaming industry can be a cruel place where what you end up with isn't what you wanted to make. Anyway, since this 2014 entry, we've had no official installments. The legacy of this series is 2 PC games that are heralded as amazing by some, a third game that's more divisive but generally liked by the same people, and a 4th game that doesn't really have any legacy. It came and went with its legacy being just a couple people who played it 10 years ago and thought it was okay. And I happen to be friends with the only 2 people who liked it. What a small world. And for the record, I won't be covering this game any further because I don't want to make myself really sad. If you're wondering why I had to go over the entire series just now, it's because you're going to hear me gush about the beginning of this once pioneering series, but you need to know its untimely demise. Booting the game up, we're greeted by some resolutions that were the style of the time, but like I said earlier, install tfix, which will be in the description, and it'll let everything run more smoothly. It gives you lots of options to toggle, most of which I disable, so I'm kind of a semi-purist in that way. But when we start the game up proper, the first thing we'll notice is the iconic menu. It's industrial, it's gritty. It, like me when I play this game, is letting off some steam. It is perfect. It's very minimalist and simple, but even before we see the game proper, we already have a sense of this game's tone and universe. There's a completely optional tutorial that we can play, and I would recommend it to all first-time players. You'll also see that Thief has a few differences to other stealth games. Unlike those, this is extremely dependent on sound and lighting. We move more quietly on softer floors like carpet, and there are varying levels of sound for things like wood and stone, and the absolute worst of it being metal flooring. We get different walking and running speeds, which also exacerbate the sound propagation. Darkness is your best friend here. To the point, the game can sometimes be a difficult pain to look at. There's a gamma slider in the options that I recommend you using. It's your best friend. Just don't go overboard with it and wash out the game's atmosphere. We have the light gem on our HUD at all times, and it shows off how visible you are based on your surrounding light sources. It helps remove any guesswork, because some dark corners can look the same as other dark corners, even if they are technically less dark. The maps are often filled with unlit areas to skulk in, as this is a fantasy world, though not the kind most people would immediately think of. At first glance, it's not too dissimilar to what we would think of medieval Europe, though we do have sorcery here, but technology is quite a bit further than it was relative to our own history. While not everywhere, we have electric lights, there are alarm systems, and there's other miscellaneous steam doodads. Though some streetlights also work on magic, it's a really cool setting, one of my favourites across anything ever. Though I did gloss over, this is a world that has zombies, there are weird monsters called burricks, and I love them, and we get other weird things like exploding frogs. There are so many small details here, world building from NPCs who talk very loudly. There are books we can read, as well as scrolls and tablets, and they flesh out the immediate surroundings and the larger universe. In fact, most of the actual story here is just presented this way. It's a really rich story, but we get it from the perspective of some thief who isn't really involved in politics, religion, or the world itself. All that initially concerns Garrett is what actually happens to him directly. There's so much to get from the writing here. Ken Levine, the lead designer and writer for System Shock 2, wrote for Thief. Don't like the fact that he also wrote for Bioshock Infinite Cloud Your Mind. He can be a great writer sometimes. The story here is deceptively brilliant, but more on that in a few minutes. You see, this isn't just a stealth game, it's one of the earliest and most iconic immersive sims. And if you don't know what that means, it's just what we call games to sound smart sometimes. But this game is mechanically alive. Our handy bow and arrows aren't just primarily for hurting enemies. This is the kind of game where you're actively punished for trying to be a murder machine. We have moss arrows that we can shoot onto the floor to quiet our footsteps. Water arrows to put out fires, namely torches. That way we can make the room easier to hide in. Rope arrows which can be shot into any wooden surface, and suddenly you have a climbable rope. It's a great way to reach new heights, or to descend deeper into the depths. This item alone rewires your brain and it recontextualizes everything. Who needs a pathway to be explicitly put in front of you? Make your own pathways. There are noisemaker arrows that we have that make loud distracting noises in an arcing angle. It's sure to attract guards away from their positions. And then we have fire arrows, which can be used to make your job a lot harder, but they're also great for killing the enemies you're permitted to kill. More on that later. Oh, and we have normal arrows. They can be used for killing too, but I like to use them to activate switches that we can't reach traditionally. In addition to all these arrow types, we can also douse our water arrows in holy water to make them, for a limited time, holy water arrows. There's also an overpowered item we get late game called the gas arrow. Our protagonist Garrett attached non-lethal knockout gas to some arrows somehow. Long range pacification. Doesn't come often, but you'll savor it. It's like this game's BFG. And on the bow itself, it has a little bit of a wind up to use. The longer you hold the button down, the better your aim will be. But it's only to a certain point, because if you continuously hold down the button, your aim will get more wobbly, and then eventually Garrett will have to put down the bow. He can't hold a bow forever, he's not Superman. The next tool in our arsenal is our trusty lockpicks. Emphasis on plural here, because we have 2 sets of them, and doors usually require both sets to be used. Start with one, then the other, and then go back and forth depending on how tricky this door is to open. There's no minigame here, it's just a long and cumbersome way to open up doors, and I love it. To me, this is how you do lockpicking in a stealth game. It leaves you vulnerable as you slowly stare at a door that is getting increasingly closer to being opened. It's really tense, and it's all communicated with little things like the doorknob wiggling, and there's an awkwardness of switching from lockpick to lockpick, and it's all very intentional. It's not that they couldn't think of a lockpicking minigame, it's just they knew the best way to get this all across without it ever becoming tiresome or repetitive. And the time it takes to open these lockpicks is the right level of annoyance. It's long enough that it's really stressful, but not long enough that you're ever deterred from doing it. It's not a burden. It balances that tightrope perfectly. It also encourages you to pickpocket keys from guards, and it's such a rewarding feeling when you get those keys and can just open a door instantly. Also on other items, we have the flash bomb, which is a great get out of jail free card. Throw it in their face like pocket sand and escape. Or bonk them on the heads because they're really vulnerable when they're blinded. The flash bombs seem pretty inconsistent. It's always good to try a quick save before throwing them. Also quick save before you ever use a ladder or even sometimes a rope. This game's a masterpiece, but there's still some jank around it. The world really is your reactive playground. It's awaiting your sneaky little feet and grabby hands. But before we get to the fun, I didn't even explain who Garrett is. Well, initially, he's just an orphan street youth who's picking pockets to survive. But he winds up attempting to steal from some mysterious man who's in a group called the Keepers.
That's not for you.
Please, sir, I'm hungry. Don't tell the Hammers, I promise.
What is your name, boy?
Garrett.
You have talent, lad.
Let go of me, old man!
To see a keeper is not an easy thing, especially one who does not wish to be seen. We have a need for those as gifted as yourself. If you've grown tired of how you live, then follow me, and we will show you a different way.
And over the course of the series, we learn a bit more about the Keepers. They're essentially a mysterious group of hoarders of knowledge, and they have a lot of secrecy. Because of this incident, Garrett grew up as a Keeper in training, but once he was old enough, he just left and pursued his own lifestyle of thieving, all thanks to the skills that Days trained him in. So now, Garrett is doing everything for himself, and more importantly, for his landlord. These games make it clear that Garrett is just getting by despite his many crimes. Rent is always due, and retirement is a distant prospect he can't even dream of. There is a lot of wealth disparity here in this universe, though that works well for Garrett because it always means there's more to steal. We see this first and foremost with the iconic Lord Bafford's Manor. This first proper level is absolutely perfect as an introduction. Level 1 stuff. We get everything here, and I feel like your enjoyment of this single stage is a litmus test for if you can gel with Thief as a series. It's such a strong start without any of the issues that plague some later levels. Albeit, it's a bit too easy for experienced players, but that's not a bad thing. On that note, we have different difficulties, and you can switch between them on every mission. Instead of adding extra tough enemies or making it louder or something, it gives you the same stage, but you have more objectives, some of which force you to stay much longer and go into parts of the locations you never had to before. On normal, you can get away with just seeing some of the map, but on expert, you're scrounging everywhere you can, so then you can set all the specific objectives and meet the loot quota for all the miscellaneous goodies you pick up like jewelry. And to top it all off, expert mode forbids you from killing any humans. If you're spotted, you have to run and hide, or you can be a coward and reload your save. Even on normal mode, however, sword fights can be winnable, especially with the robust sword fighting mechanic we have here, though this will drain you, and multiple fights of this will kill you. It is never worth it to get into sword fights. You might be wondering why such a detailed game that basically encourages you to not fight has such a detailed sword fighting system. That's because this game started out as something entirely different during its development, but later on, instead of being the action role-playing game it set out on, they decided to make it pure stealth. But remnants of that earlier game are visible in some later missions, because Thief as a series isn't always known to stick for landing. I love these games and hold them all dear, but each one has a small issue or two. For right now, however, don't worry, just explore the city streets, and find some kind of alternate entrance to the manor because the front door is heavily guarded.
It's a few too many to try to get by
Going to the bear pits tomorrow.
There are things like sewers that will get you in. And once you're inside, steal everything that isn't nailed down, and exit without a trace. Beyond maybe some guards with skull damage after being knocked out with a blackjack. And then get back to the city streets and escape. And when I call it the city, that's a proper noun, because the Thief series primarily takes place in a city called The City. Very creative name, though they do at least try with some of the districts here like Dayport, Shoalsgate, and Shalebridge. And by gum, it put them on the map. This mission, in addition to being a great one to start off, is a fantastic introduction to the concept of ghosting, a popular fan challenge where players just get by without any head bonks or anything of a sort. Basically in and out without any proof that you were there, beyond missing valuables. This level is the perfect training grounds for that. Though the game never requires it, it's just a fun superfan kind of thing. And I recommend everyone try it at least once in our short lives. Exploring this first mission, we even get to hear some of Garrett's signature quips. And more importantly, we get our introduction to Benny, a guard that everyone seems to hire who gets drunk and says silly things.
The sir could really beef up security some. What do you mean? What's wrong with us?
Well, we're fine, but I've been thinking we should watch the outsides more.
That's stupid. People to worry about there on the inside.
No, then you catch them before they get inside, you taffer.
Oh.
He helps to lighten the mood of a game that can leave you more tense than a camping supply sale. Though technically, he probably isn't Benny. It's just that there's one named guard in the entire series with that name, and the fanbase likes to apply it to everyone who shares that voice, because this game reuses voices a lot. It's a comfort thing. We can pretend Benny is always with us. Ideally, every stage would be like this, but expanded and more difficult, and Thief will deliver many more like this. But in this first game at least, some stages are hit and miss, and the next one is both hit and miss at the same time somehow. But before the negativity, I need to bring attention to the wonderful presentation of the mission briefings. They're all stylized and wonderfully presented by Garrett himself, and they explain everything perfectly.
I have a simple job planned for this evening. Break into a guarded mansion, steal another fat nobleman's priceless trinket, and leave quietly. Lord Bafford is out of town, and rumor has it that the captain of his house guard went with him as a bodyguard. The time is ripe for a bit of burglary. The front gate of Lord Bafford's manor is always guarded, and the main street is far too exposed. But Cuddy tells me there's a better way in, around to the side, more out of the way. One guard, and likely no witnesses to complicate matters. The piece Cuddy wants is a scepter. Silver, jewels, the usual adornments. It should command a high price. Bafford, like most of his kind, probably keeps his treasures on the top floor of the place, close to his heart, and far from his servants. No point in waiting. I have Cuddy's old sketches of the place, and everyone who's going to be asleep inside already is. It's time to begin.
For this second mission, we're not even a thief. We're here to break out our associates from prison, not for any loyalty ties, but because they didn't pay us for the last mission. And also, one of them has a sister that Garrett is invested in. Later during the mission, we actually get informed about some great stuff to steal from the evidence locker.
Felix went after the Horn of Quintus, down at Bonehoard. Left me his notes. The Hammers got him, put him in their evidence box. Loot collection, more like. Upstairs. Officers' quarters.
This goes to show that mission objectives are always fluid. We get an extra one mid-mission here, and one of our earlier ones is actually removed, because this guy is dead and can't be rescued. Also, just need to acknowledge that there is sunlight here. This mission is some of the only proof that Garrett isn't a vampire, because he almost exclusively, across the entire trilogy, does his business during the night. Now, later on, this mission will become a fun, bombastic prison escape with lots to love, but before we get to all that fun stuff, we're properly introduced to the undead here. They kinda suck. They keep getting back up unless you use holy water to actually cause them to die for real this time. And they're just annoying more than anything. But their sound design is great. I love these groans. Though it doesn't hold a candle to the scarier noises we hear much later. It may not look like it, but Thief has elements of a horror game here, and this zombie-filled opening track is our first taste of it. From a conceptual level, I just love that this prison is run by the Hammerites, essentially a religious fundamentalist organization, but they're also on the forefront of this industrial technology, strangely enough. And this prison is located on top of an abandoned haunted mine. It's also not just a prison, it's also a foundry because the Hammerites are like that. More on that later, but this is the kind of stuff I come back to Thief for. This game can be a bit divisive in the community because of its reliance on non-traditional stealth levels, usually filled with monsters and ghouls rather than nobles and guards. And this is largely a first game issue, if you consider it an issue at all, because some people love this kind of stuff, and it does help to give this first Thief game its own identity and charm. And I'll admit right now, I'm the kind of person who has the most fun in sprawling mansions doing the usual stealth thing. But the reason I initially planned to just cover the first game is because I love everything unique it has to offer. It's not my favourite entry in the series, but I love it nonetheless. This whole preamble is needed because Mission 3 is an adventure through an old abandoned tomb, and lots of people don't care for this level. It's booby-trapped, filled with zombies and other undead, and, there's no human enemies to worry about. Though, in a touch I love, we actually come to this mission because in the previous one, that extra objective we got was to steal a map for a place called the Bone Horde, and that's where we are now. Some guy was locked up before he got to finish out this job. Everything so far has been tied together beautifully and I love it. This isn't just a series of unrelated missions, it's a connected world. Garrett just keeps being stringed along. And with this map, I have to get to the elephant in the room. The maps here in Thief are, well, deliberately incomplete and rough. They're usually hand-drawn or are actual in-universe maps that can be quite often old or unhelpful. Sometimes we have notes, sometimes we have question marks because the person who made this map doesn't actually know what's inside. They all make sense in-universe. But this could be inconvenient from the player's perspective because we're playing in the future where every single pixel on a map is readable, and we get giant waypoints or mini-maps or other things like that so you never get lost. But here in the Thief games proper, you have to combine incomplete maps with your compass and your ability to perceive these levels as real physical spaces to navigate. It's a wonderful feeling, and it makes all these locations feel real. Especially considering the maps here are very sizable by the late 90s standards of 3D gaming. But they're all still small enough that you can fit them inside your brain without any issue. There isn't any sprawling nothingness here, everything has a point. All this limited guidance you get not only immerses you as the character, but it reinforces the strength of this world since every map you get is diegetic. Someone in the world had to create it, and you even get to create your own little notes by clicking on it and typing something. It's not something I really use, but it's a fantastic inclusion for those who need to jot things down. In fact, to skip way ahead to some levels I don't particularly care for in its sequel, we have to explore a particular mansion where we have no map, but as we explore we fill in the map gradually. We're creating our own map. The next mission, we come back here and the only things on the map are the levels we saw previously. Conceptually, I love that. And in the third game, you'll sometimes not have maps to levels at all, unless you explore around and find the physical maps itself. This kind of attention to world building gets to me so much, and the Bone Horde being the reward for this chain of events so far that all stemmed from the first mission is phenomenal, and it will keep going from here. I don't want to be too negative, which is why I praised everything so far, because this level isn't exactly one of my favourites. At this point, it's the bottom of the barrel, but that will change soon. So instead of talking about how I don't particularly love this level, I'll praise the stage because of its atmosphere. This goes for the game as a whole, but it's at its best in these dark, haunted locations where you feel like people shouldn't be. The Thief games can be genuinely frightening at points, and a large part of that is just from the audio design. Some enemies sound scary, but we also get atmospheric ambient music that blends so well with these stages that it feels wrong to listen to them on their own, but I still do anyway because they're that good. It's dark, it's moody, it's naturalistic, and it's all perfect.
Tombs with piped-in music. How classy.
Though we do get some weird music, like in the Thieves Guild, there's this one song that everyone hates, but it's my jam. Unfortunately, this game with fantastic audio is a bit too reliant on it. This game and its first sequel aren't very welcoming to people with hearing impairments, because there's no subtitles. This goes for cutscenes, mission briefings, and just general NPC chatter. I was going to complain about it, and I guess I sorta did, but I did learn that there are Thief subtitle patches made by fans. I'll be linking those in the description, and hopefully this widens the reach of its player base. Also, if for some reason in the future the download links no longer work, I'm sorry, don't keep asking me in the comments to update it because I'm just the messenger here. Actually, keep doing that, it'll help the algorithm, maybe. The following mission concludes this continuing story wonderfully. We start off at a store selling our now plundered valuables from the Bone Hoard, only to see the shopkeep in front of us fall thanks to an arrow shot through the window. The assassins loudly talk that they got Garrett, mistaking that man for you. And now we have a tailing mission where we have to see who hired these assassins. First of all, the scope of the city that we see here is astonishing, just in a single level. It's mostly a set piece, but they didn't need all this. It's a technical feat. I honestly don't know how they could have made something like this. Thief the Dark Project knew that an entire mission where all you do is follow people would suck. So this is thankfully the introduction to one of my favourite stages in this trilogy. And this introductory task helps set it apart from the myriad of other mansions we break into. After all this tailing, we find ourselves at the imposing estate, and it has so many pathways and openings that we can take. It never gets old for me. Bafford was a taste test, but the Ramirez mansion is the real deal of what Thief is like at its best, and there will be more to follow. It's all intentional and very clearly playtested a ton, but sometimes the way this game works, it almost feels like cheating how you can navigate from area to area, like leaping from this outer wall to a nearby balcony. We have crawl spaces, we have secrets and fireplaces, and a whole basement area where Ramirez does weird stuff, like have his own barracks as pets. Yeah, I love barracks. They're cute and harmful, but I love them, look at them. Though the sound they make when you kill one does kind of break my heart. This mission is also when we're properly introduced to lockpicks. Beforehand, we were at the mercy of finding keys, or just having every door be unlocked. But now the game is showing the complexity is starting to ramp up. This is when Thief really starts to get its claws into you. On that note, I need to talk about how money and items work here. Each mission will have Garrett bring in some predetermined items. Lockpicks are always there now, but you'll also have things like arrows of different types, and maybe some other goodies like a flash bomb or holy water. But each mission also starts with a store screen where you can buy more goodies for that following mission, and only that following mission. So you can stock up on extra water arrows or moss arrows, maybe get some mines or whatever else you think you need. You'll get more exciting items later on, and they do cost a lot, like those gas arrows. The money that you use to buy this is whatever money amount you looted in the previous mission, and again only that mission. So Thief's economy of items and money is very use it or lose it. You're encouraged to buy items and use them. There is no hoarding them for a later case, because there is no later as far as the game is concerned. Garrett's wallet and bag is a black hole, and your goods will be eaten if they're not used quickly enough. So go wild, use your fun items, and spend all your money like there's no tomorrow. In addition to encouraging experimentation and preventing late game snowballing, where you could suddenly spend tens of thousands in the final few missions and snapping the game's difficulty curve in two, this also directly rewards you for your performance on each mission. Sure, you only need X amount to finish the level, but if you steal a few more valuables, you can buy more equipment next time. I'm sure to some this is all a bad idea, and they don't like how nonsensical this all is, but it does wonders for the game feel. Otherwise it turns into Thief Deadly Shadows, where I always have more moss and water arrows than I could ever use, and the game feels incredibly trivial. Now that game follows the more logical, but less fun method of letting you hoard everything from mission to mission. As stated earlier, this Ramirez level is the end of the first story thread of the Odd Connected Jobs. And if you were playing the original game, the proper story would start to begin, though you wouldn't be aware of it. But this is Thief Gold, the enhanced version that came out a year later, and in addition to lots of minor changes, like I said earlier, it added 3 new missions. And in an idea I loved, they squeezed all these missions into the existing game's framework without messing up the story. You think there'd be an epilogue or some menu for extra expansion levels or something, but no. Instead, we get 3 interstitial stages, and this first one takes place between the introductory story chunk and the main story itself. It's a little orphan mission that connects to nothing and can be skipped without any consequence. And I don't just mean the story of it can be skipped. Skip the mission, it sucks. Press Ctrl, Alt, Shift, and End as soon as you start the level and skip it. But to give this level its due, this is the Thieves Guild. The design of this mission is atrocious. It's easy to get lost, and nearly everything about it is a chore. It legitimately feels like a very amateur fan-made map. And I don't want to insult the fans, because a lot of the fans make great missions, but this is below the standards of even most of those. But we do get 3 things about this that I like. One of which is that out-of-place song no one else likes. Another is the NPCs here are all thieves, and because of that, they know Garrett extensively. If you're spotted, they don't just call you a taffer, which is a very common insult in universe. They will specifically call you out by name. And finally, the concepts of this stage are really nice. It's initially a restaurant with a hidden casino, and then after all the boring sewer stuff, we emerge into 2 mansions. The problem is, most of this map sucks. Even those highlights aren't designed the best. But conceptually they're cool. That's all the stage really has going for it. Any joy you get from this level will come after you've replayed the game a bunch. So if this is your first time playing the game, you can easily just skip this level and you won't miss anything. In fact, this could be the stage that breaks you and stops you from seeing the rest of this game's beauty. But after this filler, we finally get things back on track with the most iconic stage of the game. But first, I just need to preface that this video is going to go into spoilers for the entire series. If you care and don't want spoilers, you know what to do, which is to obviously watch the rest of my video to get my engagement up, but just plug your ears, or better yet, hit the mute button. Never mind. Most people clicked off as soon as they heard my voice. Anyway, this mission introduces us to a woman named Viktoria, and she has tasked us with stealing a sword from some rich guy named Constantine. Not much is known about him, except he's a new face in town, and his mansion initially seems like any other, but the more we see, the weirder it gets. It starts with small things like crooked windows, but then we see upside down rooms and 90-degree rotated rooms, or there's this optical illusion area with lots of tiny doors. But they're all still minor compared to the immense amount of plant life, both in the windowless upstairs and the dank basement. Later on we get to the mysterious black void dimension, and this hallway is wrong. I don't like it. Before this point, and for most of the game going forward, everything has made sense, with no real cheating about room dimensions. How it looks on the outside should reflect the interior design. This game is consistent. But Constantine's place isn't, and it's very deliberate. The Gold Edition even added some gigantic rooms that make no sense, and there's guards there that got rat-trapped. This place is meant to throw you off balance, and it's phenomenal in its execution. But that isn't even as good as the reveal afterwards in one of the game's stunning cutscenes.
A refreshment, Mr. Garrett. I'm in the possession of a superior brandy that has the most restorative effect.
I prefer my payment in cash, not liquor, Mr.
My apologies. I've been watching you, Mr. Garrett, so closely, in fact, that I'm afraid I'd forgotten we haven't actually met yet. I am Constantine.
All this time I thought you were gonna pay me. You've brought me here to kill me?
But you have it all wrong, Mr. Garrett. Would it surprise you to know that it was I who hired you to steal my own sword? Yes. You see, Viktoria and I are...
Old associates.
Yes. You were being tested, do you understand? And I must say, you more than live up to your reputation. You are quite an extraordinary thief.
We were actually hired by Constantine to steal his own sword. This was just a test to see if we could actually do what he wants. A mysterious artifact that he wants called the Eye is locked away in an abandoned cathedral that's filled with the undead. And you know what? Garrett doesn't judge. He'll do this mission even if the eye talks to him.
To rescue me, poor man. The keepers have sealed the door, and only they know how to open them.
Because this mission will pay a lot. In fact, it's enough for him to retire on, so he's more than happy. So we get this entire mission where we have to navigate the Old Quarter. It's the city's earliest district, and one that was also victim to a zombie apocalypse decades earlier. The scale of this mission is huge, and unlike our previous missions, here we have an old map from back when this was a thriving area. As a result, it doesn't accommodate for things like debris making certain paths inaccessible. It's once again fantastic world building for a game that is already head and shoulders above its peers in this regard. This trek will eventually take us to that blocked off cathedral I mentioned earlier, but it can only be opened by getting 4 specific talismans that must all be used at once to open these doors. And those aren't here, so we now have a series of missions that are a bunch of busy work to make sure we can get to this blocked off treasure. The difficulty of obtaining this is exactly why we were hired to do this. This isn't some easy go to the place and grab the thing, there's lots of busy work. Especially here on the gold version, where they doubled the number of missions we need to do for this segment. In the initial release, we had 2 missions which each had 2 talismans, but here, each of the talismans gets their own mission to accommodate it, and I much prefer this approach. But even ignoring that, you can see how tactful they were in placing these new missions in a way that wouldn't interrupt the story or its flow. In retrospect, it makes the original version feel incomplete or rushed, but this enhanced version seems like what the intention was all along. And the presentation of the mission briefings is still on point. It never feels like these were recorded later than the others, or these weren't the originals that were released. This game is very consistent in making sure everything new it has feels like it was always there. Unfortunately, one of these 2 new levels, I don't really care for it, but the other one is one of the game's best levels, and I love it. Thief Gold's such a weird release, where one new level of his campaign is complete garbage, and another is okay, and the other is perfect, no notes. But onto the okay one. It's at the Mage's Tower, and it has cool concepts, but it drags on way too long. This is a mission that's made up of 5 towers, 4 in each corner of the map, and then a central one. And the problem isn't necessarily the quantity of these, though I'd still say it's a bit much. But it's all exacerbated by the fact that this is a very linear map, and more importantly, most of what you do is very boring. Like, there's a lot of cool stuff in the level. I love the in-between areas, the gardens, the libraries, and I even love that the mages here have these creepy voices, and when you're caught, they will use all their magic on you to put you down.
The darkness will not protect you for long. The walls have been breached.
It's just that most of your time in this mission is in these elemental towers that have their own gimmick, and the only one I find any enjoyment from is the water tower, because it's nonsensically flooded and I love how they did it. It's quick, it's easy, and look, you open the door and the water stays in because magic. But the others are, well, there's slow moving platforms, or look, there's loud floors, some of which will hurt you. The wildest thing is, this mage-filled level is meant to be home of a mysterious group called The Hand. They were added to the game with Thief Gold, and the following level in the gold version even replaced some regular monsters with mages from The Hand. That's 2 back-to-back hand missions here in Thief Gold, and remember, they had no appearance at all in the original release. It might seem like this is building up to some really cool story about this sect, but no. In the timeline we live in, this is really the entire representation we got. They're not in any other missions of any of the official sequels, though they were planned for Thief 2 Gold, a release that we were deprived of because the studio shut down. So as it stands, this is all just some kind of weird world building, but hey, I like it. The next talisman, it requires we go to an underground ancient city, and it's one my brain always defaults to whenever I think of bad missions in this game, but whenever I replay it I always end up enjoying it more than I expected. The setting helps a lot because it's really unique, and we get a small glimpse of an earlier society complete with their old gods. Much like the Bone Horde, this feels more action-adventure than Sneaky Thief, but the execution here is what makes it different, and it helps that the enemies here aren't the slow-moving zombies who you can just run away from. Here the gimmick is fire elementals who can do some serious damage, but are easy to put out with your water. And since no one else carries water arrows, it's easy to see why so many that come here have lost their lives. Like on higher difficulties, we have to collect medallions from a lost Keeper expedition, one that just didn't survive. This really reminds you that the Keepers are an important part of this world and not just some backstory for Garrett. He abandoned them, but he's seemingly not on the worst terms with them, and it's good for him to be owed favours. It was also the Keepers that spread these talismans far and wide to prevent people getting access to the Eye. Props to the Keepers for that extra effort they put in the gold release. You kind of half-assed it earlier when you just put 4 things in 2 places. After the misstep before and the diversion with the genre change, we're on to 2 bangers that really reinforce that we're playing as a master at his craft. The Song of Caverns is that mission I alluded to earlier that was added in Thief Gold and I love, and this mission alone is why I recommend playing the Gold over the original Dark Project release. It's not the best the Thief series has to offer, but it's still damn good. Initially, we're tasked with getting to some underground caverns to find the Talisman of Water, who was buried in some caves that these crustacean monsters named Craymen use. And you can clearly tell that they're here because this map that we get is a thing of beauty. Look at them. Anticlimactically, we get to the trap-filled cavern where the talisman's supposed to be, only to find that someone already planted it. But while we're in this area, we find a hermit named Raoul, and he lives underneath an opera house.
I, Raoul, do accuse you of using treachery to obtain your wealth. Then Lady Valeria sings, I, Lady Valerius, have obtained the opera house, yes. Right from under your nose, you must kiss the ground underneath my toes.
He provides us a very useful map of this opera house, and now our mission has changed drastically. This isn't a cave adventure with monsters, it's stealing from the rich in a beautiful setting, and there are lots of people to bonk on the head here, from patrons of the arts to performers to guards. This building is filled to the brim with secret passages, and it's so rewarding to steal from all these rich nobles who do nothing except speak badly of the poor.
I can't believe the Opera House is still losing money. It's all these lower-class people working in the ticket office and such. They steal whatever they can get their hands on. Valerius should fire all of them.
For once, I agree with you, Christine. Scrapping the lower class would certainly clean things up around here. But what will you do for food and shelter when they kick you out?
Taffer.
After this high point is another high point for me personally. There was a bit more jank in its execution, because it's a mission that plays by entirely different rules than everything else thus far. The final talisman we need to open the cathedral and get the Eye for Constantine is locked up in a home of the Hammerites. I've mentioned that name a lot. They built the Haunted Cathedral. They ran that prison we broke into earlier, and I've described them as religious fundamentalists. But it's here we really get to see what the Hammerites are. We get inside by posing as a Hammerite novice, all thanks to forged credentials, of course. We have permission to walk around a good chunk of the location, but as an outsider, if anything goes wrong, the guards will be on high alert for us specifically. It's a whole different flavour of stealth, one where we're permitted to explore. It almost feels like the city streets before, which were a safe area, but here it's the actual building itself. There are of course lots of off-limit areas and lots of actions that the Hammerites object to, but in this really well-lit building it stands out. The Hammerites are a fantastic addition to the setting, and I'm glad they get a mission dedicated to them this early in the series. It shows us more of their way of life. They follow a god named the Master Builder, and their holy item is a hammer. It's also what they use to whack you to death with if you're caught doing anything wrong. It's a multi-purpose item. Their view of religion is directly tied to technology, because to them, the Builder is the one that freed humans from what was deemed savagery, and now humans have technology. You can see why they're such an industrious group. They also speak in an old form of English which really sets them apart, in addition to their iconic garb and love of the builder. And even when you don't directly interact with them, like in most of the series, their influence seeps in everywhere. Anyway, in this mission, steal their valuables, desecrate the holy place, and collect the eye, the one task you're actually being paid for. Return to the cathedral is a lot of things, and at times I love it, at other times I hate it. It's emblematic of the atmosphere of this first game, and the location is filled with lots of zombies, terrifying hammer haunts, and ghosts that want you dead. And it's all delivered in the most gothic feeling mission we have here, a giant old cathedral that no living being has been in for a long time. It's so nice to actually get to enter this locale after just being teased with it several missions ago, and this should be a quick run and grab. The only problem is, as soon as we grab the eye, the front door locks and we're trapped here. There's no way out, and it's not like Garrett can climb on stone walls or anything, that'd be silly. At first I adore the sudden challenge of having to find an alternate way out, and has us navigate this terrifying locale and learn more of its history. It immerses you in deep. The problem arises as we have to speak to this friendly ghost who will let us out of a level if we help him. It starts off simple, fetch some items for him, and I actually enjoy this quite a bit. But then he wants more from us, like carry the corpses of his friends to their open graves so they can be laid to rest. But we only have to do this on higher difficulties, and if you play on expert mode, you're then tasked with killing every Hammerhorn enemy in the game, and I hate doing this, it feels anti-thief to me. This mission was notorious enough back in the game's original release that people found out you can actually skip most of a stage by just putting something in front of a door so it won't lock on you and you can just walk out the way you came in. This was patched out with Thief Gold, and now the doors are the heaviest things in the universe, and they will force themselves closed no matter what. Too bad the devs didn't account for you just being able to carry boxes to a specific place, so you can just climb up a wall, walk on a roof, and get back the way you came. Unfortunately for the first Thief game, in my opinion, and the opinions of many others I've seen, but I'm specifying it this way so people don't yell at me in the comments if they really like this stuff, but to me, this is when the game's quality kinda falls off a cliff. Until now, Thief was a spectacular game, with some moments that weren't quite as good, but it was always fun, Thief's Guild notwithstanding. I'm even one of the biggest defenders of the Bone Horde. I think it's fine. But now we have 3 missions left, and the best one of these is also fine. And the other 2 are, well, not great. But before that, we're graced with a cutscene where Garrett returns to Constantine with the eye, and I'll just let this play out.
I can't tell you how pleased I am with you, Mr. Garrett. I simply can't find the words, but perhaps Viktoria can help me in that regard. She has such a way with them.
Yes, we are both so very pleased.
Viktoria?
Even though the eye is defective.
What?
Viktoria is quite right, Mr. Garrett. I don't mean to sound ungrateful, but this eye is completely blind.
It's a rock. It's what you asked for. Am I gonna get paid or not?
Of course. Viktoria, are you prepared to give Mr. Garrett his compensation?
Bow to the woodsy lord, and offer up your flesh eye so that his eye of stone may see, man-fool. Bids he then the spruces to singer him and antlers, and the woodsy lord binders then fleshes to stone.
Did you think those ancient phrases were mere words, man-fool? Look at me. I am the woodsy lord, the trickster of legend. If you be thirsty, flesh thing, drink of me. If you be hungry, then feed, for I am the honeymaker and the jumpsberry.
He am the leaf that feeders on the fleshed ones, them that calls themselves builders, and wielded up a hammers against him.
My poor Mr. Garrett, you will not live to see the sprawling glory of it. Your sacrifice is not yet complete. 9 lilacs and 9 thistle-blades must feed and die. Stands he then in the green's infested maw, and speeds he out his judgments upon the weeps and writhing man-foes.
Garrett is now one-eye lighter, and he's been left for death. It turns out that Constantine was the trickster, a god of the pagans. A group that in this universe we haven't had direct contact with, but they've been alluded to a lot in things like readable notes. Viktoria is also very powerful in this nature-focused magic. This dynamic duo played Garrett for their own purpose, and now the world as we know it is on the brink of ending. It's time for the woodsy god to reign. And we've seen multiple paintings before that show the builder banishing the trickster, and I have no idea if this is meant to be taken as a literal history or just part of the Hammerite's doctrine. And we get to see what is, from Garrett's point of view, the constant battle of pagans and Hammerites, one that is presumably centuries or even millennia old. Thankfully for Garrett, who was just left to die, the Keepers release him from his viney prison, but not much else. They left him there to break himself out, with a giant hole in his face no less. Thanks, Keepers, for not doing anything else. Garrett now has to emerge from this mysterious locale that we soon find out is underneath Constantine's mansion. It's the kind of mission where we start off without any other items, but we'll get them all soon enough. And I do love the immediate feeling of being hopeless here. And this location is beautiful, and when we emerge onto the mansion proper, we see it's now corrupted by all these plants and monsters. It's such a wonderful recontextualizing of this game's map. The problem is, this mission just sucks to play, and that's not just me saying that. Thief the Circle, a popular Thief fan site earlier that even has walkthroughs of this game that people still read, its walkthrough starts off with, most people hate this level, so here's a quick and easy way out of it. Huh, I wonder what happened to this website. It's still up, and it hasn't been updated since 2010? Huh, last update was one of the site's owners, Dan, saying he got a job at some new studio, recently acquired by Bethesda Softworks and ZeniMax. And if you need a little nudge into history, Arcane Studios was acquired by them in 2010, and if you need it spelled out, we can see Daniel Todd's website where he worked on some Thief fan content, and then moved on to being a level designer for the Dishonored series. Way to go, champ, follow your dreams. Anyway, I just wanted to share some positivity because this mission is tedious and I hate it. It's filled with monsters that want nothing more than to kill you, like these bugs that I hate a lot, and a lot of this map kind of looks the same, so it's easy to get lost. You know, this might actually be my least favorite mission in the game. It's hard to say, because at least it's kind of thrilling, whereas the Thieves Guild had nothing. It's a toss-up depending on my mood, but they're both my least favorite missions. After this, it's back onto the Hammerite Temple, where we were undercover at before. Garrett has realized the futility of the situation, and now thinks allying with the Hammerites, the strongest group in the world and known pagan haters, can do something about this apocalypse. However, when Garrett arrives at this locale, it's already destroyed and corpse-ridden. It's a beautiful recontextualizing again of that game's location and doesn't feel like filler. Everything that was familiar has been corrupted. And like before, most of the actual map here is entirely new. We have to go underground and help the surviving hammers. It's not a particularly great mission, but it's sandwiched between two that I outright don't like, so it's the high point of the low point for me. We have lots of monsters, and the map still isn't my favourite, but it is still more stealthy than the other two, and we get some good atmosphere from it. These last two missions have been filled to the brim with all sorts of weird monsters that aren't just the undead of before. We have frog beasts that explode and hurt you. We have ape beasts, which are supposedly apes even though they have tails and look more like rats or reptiles or something. And we have those damned bugs that I hate, but it could be worse. During development they had tits. These are all part of a trickster's army. The pagan threats are entirely alien to us, and for all my disdain for this ending of the game, it does show a lot of creativity, and it really does reinforce for us, the player, how badly everything is going. We're now at a point where just people in general are our allies, The Hammerites are our allies. We have an all-out war with nightmare creatures now because everything is coming to an end. Oh yeah, and then we have the end of the game. This final level sees us run through a linear hallway and do annoying puzzles, and then we get the final playable moments of Thief 1, the big final boss for Trickster himself. It'd be easy to make this a combat encounter, but I'm so glad they didn't. It's still really easy, but we end the game with a sneaking challenge where we have to replace the eye that the Woodsy God has with the fake one made by the Hammerites that will explode and defeat him. Way to go, Thief. I played lots of games that messed up the ending, but you stuck the landing pretty well here. It's a shame about the rest of the ending leading up to this point, but hey, the ending is, it's okay. But hey, we saved the world, and Garrett has nothing to worry about anymore. That is until a keeper tells him to beware the Metal Age. Spoilers for this trilogy, but this is the first of 3 times Garrett will have to save the world. Though this is my favourite instance of it, because in this case, he was only saving it from his own fuck-up. If Garrett just didn't steal the eye, the Trickster wouldn't have risen. It doesn't seem likely that anyone else would have been able to complete the multiple challenges and leave the cathedral with the eye. This is kind of like a legendary once-in-a-lifetime level of thievery. And this game could have once been a legendary once-in-a-lifetime achievement itself, but thankfully for us, Thief was able to see sequels. Thief 2: The Metal Age was on the surface released only 2 years after the first, but that's not the full story. As I mentioned earlier, this was a very rushed product, and let's take a closer look at those release dates. Thief: The Dark Project was released December 1998. Thief 2: The Metal Age was released March 2000. It's only a little over a year between those releases. And that's not even considering Thief Gold was being worked on too for quite a lot of that time, and that game came out in October 1999. Goddamn, the conditions at Looking Glass must have been rough. We know some employees slept overnight at the studio just to keep forward momentum in their waking hours. And despite all that, the studio shut down shortly after Thief 2's release. The planned Thief 2 Gold and the early work on the upcoming Thief 3 were all abandoned because capitalism is cruel. We even lost the multiplayer mode Thief 2 was going to have. Everything had to be scrapped, because Looking Glass had a short deadline, and not much longer to live after that. So what was the end result of this maddening cycle? Well, one of the best games ever made, of course. This sequel looks so very similar to the first game at a glance, though there's some subtle improvements. It's a sequel that took all the previous criticisms of the first game to heart and built off it. This time, we have a full stealth game straight from the start. Every level is a giant open expanse to explore, mostly modelled after believable locales that humans would inhabit, and not any kind of dungeons or tombs. The missions are all bigger than before and more complex 3D spaces than what we previously saw. It's so impressive that we got all these large explorable buildings with the engine. That being said, this game, it's mostly normal places humans would go, and I love that. That was what Thief did at its best. But that does mean that we don't get as much unpredictability. This game is a bit more one note. It's a bit more stagnant if you want to be harsh. The game's atmosphere is no longer this dark, gothic joy of before. It's just now civilian areas and businesses and things like that, and there's a larger focus on technology than ever before. That's not to say it's bad. It's just some people prefer the older, gothic environment of before, and I can easily see why. Now, I'll be a bit more brief about this game, and the other games I'm talking about, because I don't want this video to last for a long time. It's still going to last a while, but this could be a hell of a lot longer. Missions won't get the same level of scrutiny here, but I want to talk about the story first and foremost, because it's an interesting place of comparison. Thief 1's story was split into 3 distinct parts. Garrett doing regular thieving stuff to survive, Garrett getting stuff for Constantine, and then the aftermath of all this in the Trickster's reveal. Thief 2's story is a lot harder to easily subdivide. It is always in flux. Time to quickly summarize this beast of its many twists and turns. The first mission's pretty basic, but as early as the second mission, we're already hearing that criminal activities are being cracked down upon by this new police force. And Garrett's trying to lie low, but he is pressured into more risky activities because he has to pay rent. Shortly thereafter, people storm a pub Garrett is at in an attempt to kill him, but he gives them to slip, only to show that cops are now at his home, and he now has to find a new place to live. Garrett's entire life has been upended. And during this, he uncovers that the police force, namely a Sheriff Truitt who is on everyone's ass, is involved in some shady shit going on with a new group in town called the Mechanists. The police arrest every troublemaker they find, which includes thieves, but also the unhoused and sex workers, basically anyone that they think society won't miss. And these people are supplied to the Mechanists, a splinter faction of the Hammerites who are much more into technology, but more on them later. The Mechanists turn these poor people into mechanical servants devoid of free will, and they also are capable of emitting a gas that can turn any living creature into rust. From here, Garrett is attempting to blackmail the sheriff, because thanks to the technological upgrade, he now has audio proof of the sheriff's crimes against humanity. But before we can use this to blackmail the sheriff to find out who was trying to kill us, someone else already killed Truitt instead. We then try to investigate who this is, and we're only at the halfway point of this game. The rest of it, though, is largely about the Mechanists themselves, and they've now escalated from detail of the world to world-ending threat. We even see them commit genocide against the pagans, complete with on-screen dead children and families. Ooh. The pagans were essentially the villains of the first game, or at least one member and a god were the main threat. But this game humanizes them a lot. They're not the bad guys, they're just guys who live in a forest, and they live alongside ape beasts who now look like apes finally. We even have to team up with Viktoria, the secondary antagonist of the first game, because we now both share a rival in common, the Mechanists. The way this game does its villains is a little contentious. Some people really loved that we had the mystical and godly, and now they're just, well, regular humans. And across the board, Thief 2 learns further away from the fantastical. We barely see the undead here or enemy spiders. In fact, a spider we do see is someone's loving pet, don't hurt him. And while I do miss the gothic horror and find Thief 2 the least atmospheric game in the series for this, I find this overarching threat a bit more sinister than anything with chaotic deities. It's a more insidious human evil. That someone would be willing to turn on their fellow humans and that they're able to hold such a massive influence over the world, thanks to essentially the mass murder of innocents because it's cleaning up the city as far as the police and government are concerned. This game only takes place a year or two after the previous. The Mechanists have basically come out of nowhere and taken a stranglehold over the city, and it gets worse as the story progresses. Before long, we get to the final mission, which is all about preventing actual world-ending annihilation of every living creature, as Karis, the leader of the Mechanists, doesn't think humans are fit to live in the Master Builder's world, and the only things that he wants to live here are what he calls the children. These freaky bipedal robots that come in a few different variants, like this unsettling spider thing I hate. There are also turrets that put you out of your misery later in the game. Things changed a lot, wow. Don't get me wrong, this is the least scary game in the trilogy. I wouldn't say this is a horror game, whereas Thief 1 and 3 I would maybe say count as horror. This is just a middle child, where what you get is an uncomfortable shudder when you see those uncanny robots speak, or these weird eyeball plants look at you. The new inventions of this faction extend to most missions. There are lots of security cameras connected to alarms, and of course, they have these weird faces. The children do regular patrols in addition to human guards, and not only do the children look weird, the way they speak is really unsettling too.
I do not know, a wretched creature. Please be warned, a misguided soul. All should hear the words of Karis.
This is actually Karis's voice. He sounds kind of like a droopy dog kind of thing. It's kind of pathetic and sounds like someone doing an impersonation of like a nerd they hate.
Behold, Sheriff Truitt, from the lowly street rat emerges the loyal worker, That which I call the servant.
But when a robot repeats these words, it goes from silly to unsettling, at least for me. Progress doesn't just end with technological leaps. We now have guards in this game that are women. Woo, progress. Woo, bonk women on the head. Though, there are some guards you can't bonk, and that's because they have extra armor plating on the back of their heads. Ooh, that's the most imposing thing in the game. Well, second most imposing. We also get these children that will shoot bombs at you. They're perhaps the perfect enemy for this kind of game, because you can deal with them efficiently. Just shoot some water arrows into their back because they're steam powered and have a visible boiler. Take out that heat source and they crumble, but you can also bonk them into submission if you are really patient. The difficulty with watering them is that these guys often move and it's tricky to get your shots in, and if you're exposed, you just signed up to a death sentence. This also does wonders to the water arrow economy, because we have a lot more electric lights here thanks to the mechanists. Previously, water arrows were primarily for putting out fires. Here, they're primarily for taking out the robotic security. So sometimes if you want the rooms to be dark, you can see light switches and they're a great thing to stumble across. What a simple way to darken a room. Some other items have got more use now. Fire arrows and mines, they can now take out security cameras, though it's a very noisy thing to do, and it's better to just turn them off or avoid them. But this is a great option that respects player agency, and it continues to bolster the reactive feeling of this world. We get lots of new gizmos of varying quality. First of all, Garrett now has a mechanical eye thanks to his previous one being yoinked out. The Hammerites have built this eye for him. Initially it seems that this was in thanks to Garrett allying with them to save the world. But we actually learn that this eye was specifically built by Karras, the leader of the Mechanists, before he splintered off from the Hammerites proper. Karras had hoped that Garrett would be his ally in this mechanical uprising, which clearly didn't pan out. Anyway, this eye can zoom in and out. It's not very useful, but it's a cool enough ability, and it does add some proper gameplay consequence to the last game's ending. Another item I don't really use that helps us see things, it's a scouting orb. There are these little metal balls made by the Mechanists, of course, that Garrett can throw to see a thing remotely. Good for when you aren't sure of enemy placements like around a corner. We also get 2 new potions. One is almost game breaking, and the other only breaks your fall. The former is an invisibility potion that lasts a few seconds, and is mostly a way to cheese the game when you don't want to actually try. And the other is a slow fall potion that lets you jump from great heights and not lose health upon your landing. Great thing for the verticality of some of these maps. There are also flares, an item I never use because why would I want to make myself brighter, but you know. The maps of the game are still some crude drawings, but now they more so resemble the actual locales, and we get a lot less mystery. And not only that, the areas Garrett has visited are now highlighted too, so confusion is lessened quite a bit. But other than these small changes, it's the same gameplay as before. It's just that it's more refined now because the level design completely reinforces the idea of being a sneaky thief. This is the only official game in the series without a tutorial, so it does throw off numbers a bit, but removing things like training and the gag level blooper reel from the mission count of Thief Gold, these 2 games have the same number of missions. Though there are a couple of asterisks with that. The developers seem determined to not give the players a smaller amount of missions, and because of that, we get some filler. The first Thief had us return to Constantine's Manor and the Hammerite Temple, only to see them fall into disrepair thanks to the Trickster's tricks. While Thief 2 has us revisit the city streets again, and it sucks. And towards the end of the game, we have a mansion we do twice in a row. First to gain intel, and the second to actually do the mission part of a mission. And we don't even get a breather between those, so it feels especially egregious. It's a shame that these happened and that the developers couldn't just give us a slightly smaller mission count, because Thief 2 does show some problems towards the end, though nowhere near the amount of before. And part of that is because, unlike Thief 1 where the story was crafted first and the missions were built around it, here, the devs just made cool maps, then they crafted a story around it, which is probably why the story jumps all over the place all the time. Though, it does lead to some nonsensical things, like taking a certain submarine to a certain level. Oh yeah, I'll rapid fire through these missions. It would be cruel to at least not mention how different they are thematically. Mission 1, a rich noble's mansion. Yeah, get used to that. Mission 2, the warehouse docks. And even a goddamn pirate ship here? This is already a highlight of the game for sure. Mission 3, breaking into the police headquarters and framing the sheriff. This goes nowhere in terms of story, but it is on my short list of favourite levels in the game. Helped immensely by the fact this is a mission where we're not allowed to knock anyone out, because the police would suspect foul play if there are a bunch of unconscious cops in their own station. Mission 4, run through the city streets from the pub to your apartment, and then on to safety after the attempt of Garrett's life I mentioned earlier. Mission 5, the Mechanist Seminary. This is where we first discover the Mechanist and police are working together for their Servant project. It's a great little mission, and I just love how the Mechanist seminaries and Hammerite temples are quite a bit different, and this seems much more threatening, even if it has some girl power sometimes. Mission 6. A giant bank for the richest people in the city, and it has some of the most extensive security you'll ever see. Also a contender for best mission in the game, I love it so. Mission 7. Break into Sheriff Truett's mansion, and accidentally discover his murder. It also has the legendary scene where we find out that that guard is called Benny.
Benny, you spilled the meat on the rug. Anyway, someone is on their way up to clean it up already.
But you don't understand. These Kaffers have no respect for such beautiful things.
Benny, I think you've had too much to drink. Aren't you supposed to be on duty?
So, what if I am, huh? Anyways, I work better when I'm drunk. It makes me fearless. If I see a bad guy, I'll just point my sword at him and say, "Hey, bad guy, you're not supposed to be here. Go home or I'll stick you with my sword till you go, ouch, I'm dead."
Mission 8. The first of a few blunders in the game, and even then, it's nowhere near the issues of the first game's worst missions. But here, we're in this city again, and it's for an entire mission where all we do is tail two different people. It's like the Ramirez mansion of the first game, but without the good part. This is all just the part of the game. I do have to praise the scope of the city. It's technically really impressive, even if I actually just don't like my time here. Mission 9 is a direct continuation of before. We can't even buy items between that mission and this one, because this is immediately after tailing the guy. We go for a portal, and we're in pagan territory, and we get to witness the aftermath of the Mechanists' horrors. This isn't one of my favourite missions, it's pretty linear, but it is such an atmospheric change, and I love it for being such a unique little mission. It also does a lot to humanize the pagans. We've had so many missions so far just in or around the city, and it's nice to see some greenery. Especially odd because this should be a threat. These were the people that tried to end the world last game, but now it's comforting being surrounded by their trees and seeing remnants of their way of life. Mission 10, after some less than stellar maps, we're onto another certified banger, in the cream of the crop of the game to me personally. In one of the best missions in the entire series, we have to run across a bunch of rooftops and get to a large mechanist building that's 6 stories high. And we get to visit lots of really small locales, like this little necromancer building, or lots of private residences, and we get to see these guards argue with each other.
Why, just last night, I saw her out back, warming up the stable boy. Such slander will not be tolerated while we're on watch!
That's only part of the mission, because then we get to go to this giant mechanist building where so much is going on, and I love it, and it even has one of the scariest things in the franchise, where this little gold robot baby thing is looking at us. It's a little cherub, and I hate it. Why is he there? Get it? I don't like it. Stop. But this mission also lets us properly see the servants. They're very unsettling, and they laugh when they're knocked unconscious. I don't like them.
So cold. So very cold. Look for the avoid the intruder. Warn the others.
They're not scary, but they make me uncomfortable. These were once human, remember?
Thank you.
Mission 11 is an underground coastal base with a mechanist, complete with a fucking submarine. It also has a freezer in it, so it's perfect. And here we're presented a genuinely touching moment, as a pagan spy begs for Garrett to kill him. And we can see Garrett's affected by this. This is entirely optional and the game doesn't really care whether you do or not. But if you swing that sword, you can tell it affected Garrett. And it would be very touching if I didn't mess up and have to hit him a few times because the first couple hits didn't actually hit him. And after all this, we have to ride a submarine to the next destination, Mission 12, one I see everyone complain about. And yeah, it's not one of my favorites, but we made it back to the Lost City from the first game, but this time the mechanists are all over this place. Because of that, it's turned from more of an action-adventure level to a proper stealth level. Granted, this level uses a bit of randomness, and even ignoring that, there's way too much security. It's kind of annoying to play this level, but there's a lot of ideas here that I like. But if we were to cut some missions from this game to get an ideal perfect game, this would maybe be on the chopping block, but ideally I'd like to just touch it up a little. It is nice to see this location come back, just because it's more unique. Because even though it's literally not unique, it's a copy from before, in this game's context it feels nothing like what we've had so far. Mission 13 and Mission 14 are that two-parter I mentioned earlier where we do that same map twice, and this location genuinely seems a little unfinished. Things look uncanny and not in the intentional Constantine way. It's little things like the shape of the house for lack of windows, and some textures don't properly connect to each other. It helps remind you that this game was rushed at the end of the day. Though, when you're actually playing the mission and not scrutinizing every detail, it's not super noticeable. One thing I will forever hate this level for is the fact that the levers to disable security cameras seem like they were intentionally made to be dickish. Some of them have to stay down, some have to stay up, and it's not uniform and I hate it. That said, I love this level on its second run. The first one I don't like, it's pretty fillery, but we're just scouting it out. Like the first mission, we can't even get into confrontations with the locals. That doesn't just mean don't get spotted, it means we can't knock anyone out. We have to ghost this level completely. But thanks to a strange quirk with the game, frog beasts. These are items we get after we team up with the pagans, and they let us unleash these explosive little guys. It fatally kills whoever they touch, but it never counts as actually killing them. It doesn't even count as a confrontation. So in this one instance, knocking someone out will fail the mission. Walking in front of someone's eye line will fail the mission. Killing them will fail the mission. But exploding them with a frog? That's fine. What a weird oversight. I'm sure Thief 2 Gold would have fixed it, but we weren't allowed to get that. On that disappointing note, we get to the final level itself, and well, this feels like an overcorrection from the first game's disappointing linear hallway. This is a giant mission where you'll spend forever in this area with the strictest security in the series, and your task is wandering back and forth to build machines, then you have to sabotage multiple towers. And by multiple, I mean 5 on the easiest difficulty and 7 on expert. It is a gauntlet that fatigues me. Honestly, I think this might be my least favourite ending in the series, just because of this. Even though this is a much more stealthy, thiefish kind of thing, I just would have preferred something a little less extreme. That all said, the overall package of these missions is quite a bit better than the first games. None are as bad as the worst parts of that game, and here, the best of a cream of a crop of a trilogy. That all said, there are some missions I could do without. We don't need those missions to double up on the same map, and that Lost City could have used a little extra work. A smaller game with more consistency would be greatly appreciated. But at the end of the day, I don't dislike any parts of this game, really. Thief 2 is still a fantastic game all these years later. It's one of the best games ever made. It just had a few small rough patches, but we can say that about any game, and I'm just splitting hairs. It's not worth dwelling on what could have been or what went wrong. Regardless of some hypothetical better version, we still got a game that was tailor-made to be the best damn sequel it could and cut the fat that the first game sometimes struggled with. It's not perfect. I'd have liked some more gothic horror, some more fine-tuning of things, maybe no tailing mission at all, But to restate what I said a few sentences ago, but in a more crude way, I need to shut the fuck up and be grateful for this masterpiece. But where do we go from here? To some, we go nowhere from here, because some people only like these first two games, but I'm not one of them. " 2004 saw the release of Thief Deadly Shadows, a game with that odd subtitle because Thief, one step forward, two steps back, wouldn't sell. That was a bit mean, and yeah, this game is still a masterpiece, but for those of you who are newer to the fandom, or those of you that just look at critic scores as your only source, Thief 3, as I'll keep calling it, was a pretty controversial game for the community. Some went as far to say this game was an insult, whereas some others thought it was pretty okay, but nowhere near the quality of the predecessors. Granted, the game has always had its defenders, but it was an uphill battle because Thief 3 had lots of problems and immediate compromises that turned away many. And in retrospect, some of Thief 4's problems started here. This game is quite a departure. It's a new Thief for a new generation. The Xbox generation specifically. This was the first game in the series to come to console, and as a result of that, and for gameplay drawbacks, some people name this game Thief Invisible War. It being developed by Ion Storm just after the second Deus Ex also helps make this a very fitting title. I don't think that's too disparaging, and that's because Thief 3 is still a stellar game and a lot of you are sleeping on it. It might be for me the weakest game of the trilogy, but that still makes it better than most games. Also, I kind of like Invisible War as well, so I don't want to be too mean. But just make sure when you play this game, you download the Sneaky mod. Unlike T-Fix and the second game's T-Fix 2, which are mostly stability and resolution patches, the Sneaky mod aims to fix the more glaring issues. The primary one being that this fix is for level loading. You see, in the original release, levels were split into multiple instances with loading screens between them. You just walked through a foggy doorway and then you'd load to the next area. Instead, with this mod, all of those disconnected areas are stitched together, and it feels really cohesive. Beforehand, not only was it just a nuisance to go to a loading screen, but it would actively encourage you to spend more time in a single area, then move on to the rest, instead of treating this as just a big open area to go at your own pace. These load zones being removed is enough to make this game immensely more fun than it ever was, but this mod adds even more things. For instance, it fixes the game's movement, because movement in this game was not great. It was primarily designed for now optional third-person view, and leaning left or right was always a mechanic in this series. But in this game, it actually puts you more into the view of danger because Garrett takes a big step to the left or right to view things. No, I don't like that. That's not great. Why is he doing that? Well, now with this mod, he just awkwardly tilts himself left and right, the way it should be. Yeah, it looks weird in third person, but it's a way better gameplay experience. Though even with these fixes, the game's movement is still a lot weaker than before. It's also prone to glitching or just not working the way you'd expect. Also, if you hate the HUD of this game, which I don't, it's stylish, it's cool, I like it. But if you do, you can bring back an old version that's reminiscent of the original games. They're not up my alley, but hey, more options the better. Immediately when we boot this game up unmodded, it's also heart-crushing for another reason. The menus look like this now, complete with most of the game's font being papyrus. And when we start missions, we don't get stylized mission briefings, just this text with a voiceover.
I got a tip last night from my fence. Heartless Perry. A nobleman named Lord Julian had some sort of quarrel and showed up at a local inn well after nightfall and in a foul mood. He's carrying a velvet bag about the size of a man's fist, and it never leaves his sight.
And when you do the first mission, it's a tutorial, but not the kind of tutorial like Thief 1 had. This is a railroaded tutorial with literal footsteps telling you exactly where to go and text boxes saying every action. It's a travesty that they did this. I'm sure it was to get more people into the series, but it just feels patronizing, especially as a longtime fan. Well, the Sneaky mod, well, it still has those menus, but we get fan-made mission briefing videos, which look really good considering.
I got a tip last night from my fence. Heartless Perry. A nobleman named Lord Julian had some sort of quarrel and showed up at a local inn well after nightfall and in a foul mood. He's carrying a velvet bag about the size of a man's fist, and it never leaves his sight.
And the first mission, it now lets you do stuff. You're not on a railroad anymore, it's actually fun. When you let off this leash, this mission not only becomes a decent little mini-mission, it becomes an effective tutorial without having to tell you everything. It's learning through gameplay. To me, it lies somewhere between training and Bafford's mansion, but it's a fun little microcosm of Thief Deadly Shadows, and it's a shame most people experienced it in the most patronising way they could. Between the first two missions of the game, you'll come to terms with the very different feeling of Thief 3, and a lot of it, in my opinion at least, is a lot worse than the gameplay of before. That's not to say it's terrible, it's not to say it's even bad, it's just less fun. And the disappointments don't stop there. The difficulty selection is a lot more standardized, and worst of all, Guard's AI is now determined by difficulty. I would say to play this on the hardest difficulty if you want the best experience, but then a new problem arises. Unlike before, where expert mode gave us more challenges, here it's the same but just collect more loot. Every stage will now have 3 special items to steal, and on expert mode you need to get all 3 of them, which can be annoying, and for regular loot you need 90% of them. That's a commitment because they're a bitch to find here, even though they glow now. It also kind of ruins the believability of this world. Before, Garrett was trying to scrounge around to make certain amounts of money and steal very specific things he had heard of, but now it's just percentages. It's like Garrett is looking at a guide and knows the exact amount of loot of every level, and just knows that there will be 3 specific goodies there. And he only chooses to limit himself on lower difficulties because he's just that kind of guy. And not to mention, even the previous 2 games on expert mode didn't expect 90% of a loot. It was a much smaller percentage, so you didn't have to hunt tirelessly for that last little trinket. Whereas I played the first 2 games on expert pretty much exclusively now, for Deadly Shadows I still play on hard, just because those 2 special items and 60% of the loot is a lot more fun than having to go around and get every little thing I could. You have to be vigilant, but you're not going to hate yourself as you look for these deviously hidden goodies. But when I do this, I know that in the back of my mind that I'm getting an incomplete version, because the guards aren't as good as they could be. Also in this game, guards will chase after you and then they'll just give up and get exhausted. What's going on? Garrett doesn't get exhausted.
Half a minute. Lungs are bursting. You're not doing yourself any good!
I'm being really negative, but I'll talk about something I love. The light gem. It is now a compass as well, and it's always on screen. What a simple little change, but this might be my favourite thing in this game. It's nice, it makes the original compass feel almost obsolete and quaint. We can always know our orientation now without having to fiddle around with items. It also just looks pretty. This new UI is very aesthetically different than what we had before, and is admittedly slower and less useful. For instance, cycling through items has a small animation I don't care for, but it's still so charming to look at that it wins me over. I'm shallow. The compass is especially important because the maps of this game have been made a lot less useful. It no longer shows you rooms that you've been to, but on top of that, these maps just look way cruder. And it's not even like the first game where they were intentionally vague like Constantine. Here it's just a few boxes with names, do the best with this information you can. But then again, because these levels are smaller than before, I don't mind these crude maps. It's not too hard to familiarize yourself with everything. And really, if I want to be really annoying, my main issue with the maps here is that font. Look at it. It feels less organic. Text is a consistent issue here. All the books and notes and everything you'll see looks very digitally typed, complete with the worst sin of all, turning a page to find just one more word, and that happens a few times. This doesn't feel like it was written by a person. It feels like auto-formatting did this and no one double-checked. I don't know if this game was unfinished in the traditional sense. It feels like details like this were never checked. I was being nice for a minute and then I got mean. Oh well, I'll be mean again a little more, I'm sorry. But this game has lock-picking minigames now and I dread having to do them, and you'll be doing a lot of them. That being said, they're not a big deal and I don't mind them, it's just I prefer no minigame to having to do this. It gets tiresome pretty quickly. Also, the blackjack saw quite a bit of a nerf here. It used to be good at knocking out guards even if they were on edge, or you could do the classic flash bomb blackjack combo to any guard who saw you. But now the blackjack can only knock out guards who are completely unaware of you, and they have their back to you as well. The flash bomb doesn't change this either. Here it's more like just a get away when you're spotted button. Blinding them doesn't make them more vulnerable. This also nerfs for noisemaker arrows, since you could do that before to position a guard for an easy whack, but now they're suspicious, so you can't knock them out, it's just a proper distraction item. The item count in general has been reduced. We don't get killer frogs, or flares, or scouting orbs, or some of those potions from before. We even lost the rope arrow. That one hurts a lot, though we do kind of get a replacement that's okay. This isn't to say Garrett isn't armed. He brings gas bombs with him, which are the most powerful item in the series. Just throw it at guards, look at them collapse, and their ragdoll physics do their best. They have bonitis. We also have oil flasks, which can be used for a myriad of reasons, but I usually use it because it's funny to see someone slip on it comically. And in another little change, moss arrows. Before, you just use them to make the floor silent. Here, you can shoot it into someone's face, and instead of piercing their head, it just causes them to choke on the mossy buildup. This won't knock them out or anything, it just incapacitates them for a few moments. Good for when you're spotted, and funny all the time. Towards the end of the game, we can also use them on these living statues trying to kill us to help freeze them in place. Most surprisingly, Garrett finally put his sword away. He now just uses a dagger for much worse direct combat, but hey, it can be used for some sneaky kills. It's good to use it on monsters or hammerhordes, or even the Shale Bridge residents. Zombies will still come back to life after a sneak attack, but it's a great silent way to temporarily deal with them. And dealing with them is a must because they're not the slow zombies of before. These are the 2000s era zombies that are fast. Unfortunately, you can't jib them anymore, but they can still be permanently killed, they just turn to ash instead. You'd think this would be all the biggest differences this game has with the classics, but no, I haven't even gone into the biggest one. In the first two Thief games, we saw bits of the city, but now Thief 3 really wanted to bring this all to life. I really don't know how others feel about this. I try not to get too involved into fandom discussions because I'm always usually wrong and no one agrees with what I say. But here, the city is a large, technically impressive place, and I hate it. Look, for the other Thief 3 fans, I will praise this game soon. I still love this game, it's just that it has a lot of drawbacks, and this city is probably the biggest one to me. The tween missions were sent to this large hub world, broken up into smaller loading screens. Frankly, the city is too walkable. The scale of this once imposing place is just a fraction of the size, and I suppose that's better than some alternative city that takes hours to get from place to place and would just be boring to play through. But this does a disservice to see these districts that we know be made miniature. A lot of your overall time in this game is just running from place to place to progress the overall story, and then doing more egregious stuff, like running to a shop to sell our loot, and then running to another shop to buy items. A thing that this game used to do automatically in the former's case, and in the latter's case, it was a single screen. I get that this is more believable, but it's not fun to do. Some places won't buy certain things from you, like you can't sell jewels at this one place, other stores won't buy art, that kind of thing, so you have to go to multiple different places to sell all your goods, and then go to multiple different shops to get different items because they don't all carry the same stuff. Can you see why I don't like this? And to make it worse, the dialogue that these places have range from
Hi, welcome to my store.
To
Say, Garrett, you got a sec? Could you sign something for a friend of mine? Sort of an autograph kind of thing? Her name's Marla too, just by coincidence. Anyway, she's just wild about me actually knowing you, but you're busy right now, I see.
It's grating, and I hate it. And when you're not buying and selling stuff, you're still traveling all over this world because in this game, you are a busy little errand boy. Go here, do that. Go here, do that. And it goes on and on and on until the story starts right near the end of the game. And while you're doing this, make sure you avoid all the guards who will chase you and deplete your health, which no longer automatically fills up between missions, and you also can't restore it by eating food. You have to specifically stock up on health potions, which you can only carry a certain number of. So you need to stock up on health potions in addition to all this. And they're an item I barely used in the first 2 games, but here I used them all the time. And this isn't even including the Hammerites and the Pagans, who early in the game will attack you on sight, but they will start to help you if you do tedious stuff like shooting arrows into these cute bugs that I don't want to hurt, or by shooting moss arrows into very specific corners of some buildings. I don't think Thief needed a faction system, but here we are. Now, I don't want to shit talk this all too much. There are some elements of the city hub I do like, even if I don't salvage it for me. We get small side quests, which are really simple things that Garrett will organically stumble on. Like read a note that says money will be left in a certain area, so you go there and you swipe it. The end. You don't need a mission briefing, you don't need anything. You just stumble upon it by reading things like you've always done in the Thief series. My favourite example of these is we can overhear a man hiring the Garrett for some thievery.
I just thought you looked different, that's all. It's nothing.
Hey, I'm the greatest thief that ever lived. I ain't concerned about appearances. Anyway, with all that thieving I do, I ain't got time for no baths or nothing.
Oh, I see, yeah, completely understandable. Enough said, yeah? Anyway, let me tell you why I wanted to meet with you, Garrett.
Yeah, get on with it. I got a lot of job offers, you know. You ain't the only merchant in town too uppity to get his own hands a bit dirty.
In this case of mistaken identity, just has you do the thing for him instead and get the reward. Brilliant. There are also some areas of the city that have brilliant gameplay sections, almost like mini missions. There is a small ship filled with zombies, and we have to go inside and steal its manifest. You know, it's cramped and not ideal, but it's atmospheric and fun, and short enough that it never overstays its welcome. But the next two are some of the game's highlights for me personally. There's a crypt that we can choose to explore, and you will have to go here later on for story purposes. But to me, out of this trilogy, this is the best the series has ever been with its undead. They're still scary sounding, and they're more detailed now with these modern graphics. Yes, I know this game is 20 years old, but they're still modern. And these undead have faster reaction times that will keep you on edge. But these zombies still patrol similarly to humans, so now stealth is much more viable and you'll be hiding in dark corners rather than tangling with them. The hammer haunts got a terrifying glow up visually, look at them. And they still make scary noises that make me want to wet myself, but now they really only do it when they're alert. They're best dealt with in the shadows with a lethal backstab, which perfectly combines the horror and stealth of the Thief franchise. Exploring here will also show you a lot of characters' resting places. I'll miss you, Ramirez. You really did love your barracks. I did too, and I'm sad they were absent from this game, though missing in Thief 2 as well outside of mounted trophies. Too beautiful for this world, you little reptile guys. I'm glad fan missions use you. The crypt is also home to a mission map, because in Thief 3, maps are often rewards for exploration, be it literally finding it as loot, or getting it as a reward for breaking a fish monster out of jail. Without this exploration, you'll be doing some missions without maps at all, which is entirely doable, but, not ideal. And my favourite of these non-mission mini-mission things is right before the final mission itself. We're finally given access to the main villain's lair, and we have to sneak around this large building to find clues. But what makes it so delightful is this location is filled to the brim with patrolling animated statues that all have a creepy voice and are a pain to deal with, and they're really intimidating. Especially this giant one that they put here.
Nothing and no one is here. Nothing is here. No one is here.
And it makes me wish that this game took all its best elements and stripped out all the fat. Because Thief 3 is great, except for all the bits that aren't. What a messy game. I'd still say the overall quality of missions isn't as good as the first two games at their best. But I'd also say this game doesn't have any bad missions. This game is hit after hit, with that filler in between. But when we're just talking about missions, this is the most consistently good set of them we see in this trilogy. There's no duds here, not even any ones, and all the problems we get from levels here are from the game-specific gameplay changes, like no rope arrows. Oh yeah, the replacement I mentioned, we can climb some stone walls now. It's not that useful, but it does have some great uses, like this one mission where we can find multiple entranceways by climbing onto the second floor from the outside. Other gameplay specific weaknesses are we don't grab a ton of items anymore. Things like keys are automatic, or other mission specific items are done for you whenever you click on an accompanying glowing spot. Everything was simplified, unfortunately. And the glowing, it has to be here because now everything in this game is so well detailed that things don't stand out anymore unless they properly glow. The predecessors were all function over form, but this is the reverse. That being said, Thief 3 is to me one of my favourite looking video games ever made. It's been 20 years, but technology doesn't trump art design, and this game is dripping in it, even if it does hinder the gameplay sometimes. And even with all this superior technology, they still remembered that distant cityscape has to be black rectangles with yellow rectangles for lit windows. I love it. Bar none, this game is the most atmospheric of a trilogy. And when I think of this game, I think of atmosphere and tension before I actually think of the gameplay. Take that as you will. But because of that, the horror from the first game is back in full force, and I really do think it's better here in that regard. But this game didn't just borrow the horror from Thief 1, it feels like the technology and universe backpedaled quite a bit. We have fewer electric lights, there aren't any robots, there are no security cameras, all that stuff is gone. The only records that the mechanists existed are some notes, and there are some phonographs still here, and some of these play old mechanist audio, but we can also get fun ones like this one that tells you how you can be the best you can be.
In your mind, imagine you have locked all your troubles in a box, and tossed the box into a deep, deep ravine. As the box falls further and further away from you, wave goodbye to your troubles. They will never make their way out of the locked box, and even if they did, chances are they'd never climb all the way out of that very deep ravine. And from now on, you will be a more relaxed and confident person, a trouble-free person, a person that can say the following out loud several times a day. I have thrown away my box of troubles.
I kind of understand the desire to bury technology made by the genocidal, and I suppose this makes me feel better about the Thief universe than I do our own one. These guys didn't do an Operation Paperclip after all. Instead of putting the spotlight on the Hammerites and those that splintered off them, or the pagans who are also very established, this game spends most of its time on the Keepers, the mysterious faction that trained Garrett when he was younger. Until now, all we've really known is that they show up after something has happened and said this was fated to happen. You also have a little girl that translates things another woman says, and it's really unnerving. Somehow both of those are the story this time, as well as infighting and internal politics of this petty little group. Sort of an odd story for a Thief game. Garrett isn't one for this kind of stuff. His stories usually involve stealing things until he winds up accidentally having to save the world. And this is technically no different, but this game leverages the fact that Garrett has a connection to the Keepers, and it tries to invest us in that. Garrett's desire is just that he wants to know stuff, and the Keepers know stuff. It also helps that by the end of his game, if he had to save the world a third time, he needs some rest. Just look at his face. We don't know how long this is after Thief 2, the timeline's a bit vague here, but just look at this Garrett, he has seen some shit. We also get some cutscenes that show us that Garrett has a Muppet mouth, unfortunately. I hate when a game looks like this. But don't worry, we still have the stylish classic Thief cutscenes on occasion. Which makes it all the weirder. This game can present action in breathtaking ways, but also the game sometimes just has to show off two characters mouth at each other because it's simpler and easier to make. But I still hate it nonetheless. If you're gonna have talking, at least just have us be able to walk around like we did with good old Raoul back in the day. Without beating a dead horse, if they stripped out all the wandering back and forth and conversations of people, and they just left it as mission briefing that explains things, mission and repeat a few times, I would maybe say Thief 3 is my second favourite of this trilogy. It can be that good, I promise. And like I said, there's no lulls in terms of actual missions. But the overall problems of this game do drag down my opinion, sadly. This is also by far my least played game of the trilogy, and I don't come back to it as often as I do its older, blocky predecessors. But why do I still love this game as much as I do? Well, let's look at the missions. After the tutorial, we have to rob a castle filled with nobles and guards. It's classic, it's safe, and it's enjoyable. And yet it's still the worst mission in the game. That's not to criticize it, it's just everything else stands above it. After this, we have 2 levels. We have to choose the order of either. You have to do both, but because of the hub world, you can either go to A or B, and then once you finish that, you do the other mission. For this playthrough, I went to some pagan territory not far from the city, though it was still far enough away that this mission breaks from series tradition and is at dawn. It took Garrett a whole while to get here, in this abandoned mine that the pagans set up shop in. It's a really different feeling than anything we've seen with the pagans. They're usually in distant lush forests from what we've seen, but this is quite a bit different. But we can see nature overtake these old ruined buildings. This game gives pagans a lot more screen time than any other game, though they don't impact the story too much. It just means we get a lot of them talking, and this game illustrates that all pagans speak in an unconventional way.
Butterweed. Ice easy. Do you thinks? Think as me them hammerheads put curses on it.
Shaman B's the only one with magics to fight the hammerheads.
Or them priestess, Diane.
Yes, but she be's busy with more important works. Takers no enemy for prisoners. Feeders them man fools to them earths.
I tells you it be's them gold and powering crowner. They be's never deserving it.
Woodsy one will be pleased till we bring her it back.
We be's not strongs enough. Them's Kershak beats us always.
Them's Kershak be's never earns it.
I can forgive it because pagans have cool scary plant monsters that I love and are from my nightmares. After this, we get a Hammerite temple, which is really fun to explore, if repeated grand for the series. It's not a particular high point, but it is still very fun to explore. Now that the introductory stages are done, the game takes off its training wheels and does so with refreshing experimentation, and it's so appreciated, while still never breaking the series feel. Once again, we have a choice for mission order, and for this playthrough I started with this weird mission first. It introduces 2 new sentient humanoid species. The Sunken Citadel is the home of the Kershak, who are these fish people, and this mission's entirely underground and by the ocean. This architecture and general design of everything is foreign to us and unique for the trilogy. And their eggs are food for the rat beasts who are also skulking here. I don't know what's going on, but I love it. You'd think we'd have a lot of swimmable water here, but nope. Thief 3 removes swimming. What a shame. If you run into the water now, you just die and glitch out, which is not that great. But on that note, if you die in the hub world, you're sent to jail and get a cool little mini mission where you have to break out and get your stuff. Thief 3, why do you keep doing this? You're so damn cool sometimes. This fishy mission is massively carried by its charm, and I wish we got to see more locales like this. But the next mission is a fan favourite for a reason. It starts out as a simple burglary of a mansion, though one given extra oomph with the storm and constant lightning. The sense of a believable world is made more manifest with the guard AI across the game. Sure, they have issues like they run out of breath immediately, but they are more vigilant than ever at times. They'll notice open doors that should be closed, or when fires are extinguished. And they even jump scare me because they always sneeze whenever I'm lockpicking and it alerts me and I get scared. And here, with this lightning during the storm, your visibility is sometimes upped, just because nature is a bitch, and they will notice you even if you're on screen just for a moment. A lot of the maps in this game are more claustrophobic than before. Hardware limitations combined with a graphical leap really did a number on the giant open expanses the franchise was once known for. Some people outright dislike this game for basically taking what were once giant maps and pushed them into tiny little boxes, and then boxing you even further because of the load screens. I'm not really a fan of this approach, honestly. Even with the levels stitched together, it's still not ideal. But I'm the kind of person that tries to look at what makes the game good rather than shitting on all its negatives. And that previous drawback of small stages is actually a feature here. This level isn't actually small by any means, but it is claustrophobic because it's an intimate mansion. We're sneaking around at the dead of night, and there is a lot of scheming going on from other guests of the estate. This feels more like a believable home than anything we've seen thus far in the series. The mansion's owner was a sailor who recently passed away at sea, and the grieving widow is now the sole head of this estate, and her servants are stealing from her while she's grief-stricken. It's even worse because there are two rich nobles here, and they are trying to steal the late husband's most important keepsakes, as they think it's no use being left to this woman who won't even appreciate it. This does frame what we're doing in an interesting light. We are stealing from her too, after all. But, in a move of genius, we can come across the widow, and she will stare out at sea for her husband's return, and she assumes you're a friend of her husband, and she's being very cordial with you during this whole thing. You can actually do favours for her, like grab some wine for her from downstairs, bring it up so she can drink some, because her staff refuse to do this for her. And if you do touching things like this, she will confide with you. It is really touching to see this. We're not used to having friendly interactions in this series. The best we've had is a ghost who wants you to do everything for him, and that's not getting old either. At the end of this mission, he'll come across a note from the recently deceased, and he'll say he left some inheritance for his wife. Now it's a thief game and you can instinctively steal it, and you get that cool little sound effect if you do. But if you leave the specific money where it is, you'll soon find Garrett's apartment has a lovely note in it from the widow, saying that she figured out who you are, and you're a nicer man than your reputation. And she'll give you some wine as a lovely gift. Now this isn't a giant signposted moral choice or anything, it's just a small moment that tests you and your instincts, and it adds so much to the series and my interpretation of Garrett as a character. And in the vanilla, non-modded game, on expert mode you unfortunately had to steal from her, because that counts towards the 90% loot goal. Thankfully the modders added in an option to lower that threshold amount, so you can play as a good boy while still playing on expert mode. This mission was a high bar, but it's neither my favourite level, or the one most people say is this game's best, and it's something that won't shock anyone. Those are two different levels for me because I'm weird and have unconventional opinions, again. Next up, it's none of those two though. It's a mission that I find has an excellent concept nonetheless. Story-wise, things pick up because Garrett has just been following orders from the Keepers this whole time, but here he makes a stand and there will be dire consequences from it. Because of his interpretation of some things, he decides, okay, I'll break into the clock tower run by the Hammerites, and I'll attempt to stop the clock. It makes a little more sense in context, I assure you. This level's a nice change of pace. It is the most vertical level we've seen thus far. We start at the top of a clock tower and work our way down, and everything is beautiful and, well, clockwork, obviously. It looks unlike anything we've seen before. This whole level is tall but compact. It's a fun treat working our way down, and even though it is linear, it doesn't feel that in a bad way. What else can you really do with a tall tower like this? After this mission, Garrett is framed for murder, because one of the Keeper's translators died, in suspicious circumstances. Directly because of this, the next mission pivots to Garrett breaking into the Keeper's compound to find evidence that proves he's innocent. And this mission is unlike anything else we've seen in the series. I keep saying that, but that's really how this game can be sometimes. And this is our best look at the Keepers thus far in the series. Now to be honest, this isn't a level I particularly care for. It has lots of narrow hallways, and it feels too easy to dispatch guards or just hide away from the few members here. But it does forward the story a lot, and at the very end, we get introduced to the scary statue enemies.
You kill and I kill and you kill and I kill.
This mission went from kind of okay to a highlight for me just to that end section for statues. I think I like the statues a bit too much, but they're just little guys. I love them, even though they're scary. This game does want to scare you towards the end, and it will do that in full force shortly, but strangely it does so without using this frightening new enemy it built up. Garrett follows the only lead he had, and it takes him to an abandoned building that if you're reading everything you can, you would have read about this, and you would know that it's haunted. Decades ago, this run-down abandoned building was thriving as a combination orphanage and insane asylum. Okay, that's certainly a combo. And thanks to this combination of medieval European aesthetics and industrial-era electricity, we get to read about all the experiments that happened here, and there's a lot of stuff was done here. They attempted to cure people with things like burning out the humours. They also did electric shock therapy, and lots of lobotomies. The latter of which they specified that they were deliberately untrained in because you can learn more about the brain if you just kind of prod at it without the full knowledge. It's messed up enough just thinking about this, but it's also an orphanage. Thankfully, the children weren't experimented on, but they were in close proximity to all this. This background enough is frightening, but the mission tries to one-up itself constantly, and this is definitely the scariest mission in the franchise thus far. The atmosphere is top-notch. The enemies are terrifying. And before you even notice them, you might just see them in the corner of your eye move in the shadows. But then the level just keeps on building, and then we have to help a ghost with all kinds of tasks? This is just a haunted cathedral again. And yet, both these missions were developed by the same guy, and they're both the horror high point of their respective games. But here, this trip to Shale Bridge Cradle is better in like every single way. The tasks never annoy or bore me. I don't want to clip out of bounds. It's always tense, and we don't have to kill enemies. In fact, for the back half of this mission, we have to avoid these silhouette spectres while being entirely helpless because we won't have any items at all to defend ourselves. It's a true test of our sneaking abilities, as well as our wetting our pants abilities. This is everyone's favourite mission, and I get it. To some, this is the only good part of the game. While I disagree, you can see just how big a step up this is, and how it would have especially hit hard to people who had no idea this was coming. This even ramps up the story considerably, which is just kind of starting, and oh, it's already the second last level of the game. Huh. I don't mind this approach, but Thief 3 burns really bright and fast with its story. There's a very slow setup that I don't care for, but when it gets going hard, and it helps feel unique in this franchise that all have different story approaches. Also, this being the second last level is less dramatic than it sounds, because we will have plenty of time between missions for extra story beats. We even get to learn 2 new things after this level. One is that ghost spirits struggle to navigate barrels that block the path, but more importantly, we find out the main villain has been lying in wait quite a while, since at least the second game when they were introduced, and presumably quite a while before that. But now her disguise is shed, and we even get to see this eldritch creature simply known as the Hag. For her short time on screen, I love her. She's my least favourite villain overall because she's barely in this game, but in terms of her actual on-screen presence and not taking into consideration the amount of it, she is my favourite. She's just so charming to watch on screen, and she can be very scary, but I'm also a little weak baby that's not good with horror games. This point is when we also get our mini-mission with that statue-filled lair, which I highlighted before. But the real final mission of this game is kind of out of place, it's anticlimactic, and I'd love it, it's my favourite one in this game. Yeah, instead of this big, scary, haunted level, we're doing a museum. It's large and open, it has lots to steal, and all the guards are human. It's out of place where we are in the story, but I still love it. I'm not going to look a gift horse in the mouth, this is fun. Everything is available to be stolen. Things behind glass, necklaces on busts, everything that's hung up on the walls. We pocket it all, I have no idea how. And at the start of this mission, we get to hear Benny. Even though they call him Sinclair, I'll choose to assume Benny's full name is Benny Sinclair. Please don't ruin it for me, that's his name.
How's it going, Sinclair?
Not bad, I guess. Only...
What? Let me guess. You got a bad feeling about tonight, right?
I've got the heebie-jeebies, something awful. I feel like there's someone watching me, even now.
Boo.
Ah, hey! Now, what'd you do that for?
Back to work, you taffer.
But after all that, the end of the mission will have us steal back the eye from the first game, which is now being displayed for some reason, and it will talk to you again. And it feels so nostalgic, even though these games were only released 6 years apart, and I play them back to back. This artifact has fallen hard. He used to be in an undead cathedral that was inaccessible, without 4 specific talismans, and now just people can look at him at a museum. That's so sad, but his constant taunting of you is something I adore.
You miss your eye, little man. I've seen many interesting things with it. Someday I might come looking for the other one.
This museum is also believed to be thief-proof, because it has things like electricity protecting its most valuable displays. And yeah, you can flick a switch to disable that, but in a touch I love, they made it so you can just use water arrows on this. I love it. I have no problems with this mission as a mission. My only qualms are, well, this is like the end of the game and it doesn't feel like it. But the game does do something good here. We have to run through the open city that I usually don't like, but here, the city is overrun by the hag and her statue minions. And instead of being an annoying thing to backtrack through, we have to make the most of these narrow corridors in this big open city and go to all these different areas and put specific artifacts there. It's not the most fun you'll ever have in the series by any means, but the presence of the hag and her statues elevates it greatly, and while it's a very low bar, this is my favourite ending to a Thief game in terms of gameplay, even though I'm running through the city, the thing I've always complained about. The game will then conclude with a cutscene establishing the new status quo that will never be followed up, because we're not getting any sequels, and we get a final depiction of Garrett that sets up a new generation to follow in his thieving footsteps.
Let go of me.
That's not for you.
Please, sir, I'm hungry.
You have talent. It's no easy thing to see a keeper, especially one who does not wish to be seen.
I have problems with this game, but if it wasn't obvious, I adore this. Like, yeah, it's my least favourite of the trilogy, but I still love this trilogy. The thing is, I did sort of omit something when I said the Thief series ended in 2004 with Deadly Shadows. And I'm not talking about that reboot. I probably never will again. The series had a passionate modding fanbase that has delivered lots of custom missions and sometimes campaigns. Relevant to this video, there are 2 fan-made expansions made by different teams of independent fans. But before I go into Thief 2X and Thief the Black Parade, I just want to shine a spotlight on some smaller ones and the whole industry of fan-made missions for Thief. Things really started early on for the Thief series, because the developers Looking Glass Studios released the level editor to fans back in the day. Even though it was clunky and hard to use, a lot of good came from it. We've seen everything from continuations of the story that give Garrett an epilogue, to missions set in other universes and times far removed from Thief. Like, there's multiple campaigns by Censored, and they show us what Thief could be pushed to if it was even more gothic. There's the Dracula campaign, Nosferatu campaign, there's Bafford, and these are all so fun to play and they really ring out this mood. And then there's something like The Black Frog by Gats, and it lulls you in with this bright evening festival, complete with dancing and frivolity, only to see it revisited later as a nightmare ripped apart by monsters. And Death's Cold Embrace. This was also made by a team of fans, and not only gives me an entire campaign of winter levels, but it leans into the fandom view of Benny and has maybe my favourite moment of the entire series, where Benny will lock us in a freezer and he'll try to show everyone the thief, only to be mocked because it's empty since we could break out quite easily through a side passage. And this is all voiced by some decent impersonators.
Benny, what on earth are you doing guarding the freezer?
I captured a prowler in there. I'm guarding it till the captain gets here.
A prowler is locked in the freezer. Alright, well then, open it up and let's see.
Oh, don't believe me, eh, Roger? Well, I'll show you. Hey, where'd he go?
Stupid
Also for Death Cold Embrace, its first mission had a whole section that left me pretty damn scared. We see a reanimated cyborg woman in the basement of a particular building, and she will try to kill you. Worst of all, she's just a reanimated homeless woman that some scientists did cruel things to. Fan-made missions come in many shapes and sizes. Sometimes they're whole campaigns, sometimes they're single missions, sometimes they're proof of concept. They could be anything. And even the ones that aren't as competently built can still show off really cool mechanics. This community isn't so dedicated that they don't just use these 3 games for custom missions. There's a whole thing called the Dark mod, which is its own separate executable that's essentially a tool for custom Thief levels. It's a whole new game with its own assets and everything, and it doesn't really have much pre-made stuff to offer. And it's not even a Thief game technically, it's just Thief with the serial numbers removed, and lots of modern reimaginings of the old graphics. But this tool lets you download missions straight from it, and it's a testament to how much the fans love this gameplay. And also, looking for a bunch of fan missions, I learned 2 constants. 1, a lot of fans of this series are Russian, and all the fans of this series love levels set on ships. I'm impressed by the amount of work people put into these labors of love, especially with just how difficult it can be to actually do great things with these tools. But like I said earlier, 2 works in particular stand above the others to me. They're titans to the fan game industry, and I personally consider them so good and so quintessentially Thief that to me, I list these as parts of the Thief series proper. Even if for legal reasons and fan wikia discussions, these are technically just fanfiction. It's kind of like how a decent chunk of the Metroid fanbase considers AM2R to be a full-fledged Metroid game, or how the good Sonic fans think Triple Trouble 16-bit is a proper Sonic game. But those are remakes of existing official games, so it's a bit easier to let them slide in. What I'm talking about are entirely new experiences, just using the original engines as a source to build off. Because these are just mods to Thief Gold and Thief 2, they kind of fall more in line with very meaty expansion packs, and if you want to consider them that, fine, but to me these are kind of Thief 4 and 5 to me, sorta. The earliest of these was Thief 2X, a game that started development in the year 2000. For context, Thief 2 had just been released and the developers had just been shut down, and some fans, fearing that no more Thief games would ever come out, started their own fan group via the Through the Looking Glass forums. And this group was called Dark Engineering Guild. It was made up of around 60 people, including artists, writers, programmers, and it even has original music separate from the game it's a mod to. Thief 2X, Shadows of the Metal Age, graced us in 2005, meaning that while this was in development with Thief Deadly Shadows, this did come out afterwards. You can tell this is a labour of love made by fans, because not only does it add a boatload of new features, it brings in a lot of quote-unquote lore to flesh out the world even more. And once again, I have to phrase it like that because it's technically not official, but damn, it really feels like it is sometimes. This game is incredibly easy to slip into the Thief continuity. It's set during the events of Thief 2. The Mechanists have risen to power, and Sheriff Truitt turns out to be a pivotal character in this game's story. But we play as someone who isn't Garrett, so we're free to have a busy timeline that won't get too convoluted. Instead, we play as Zaya, a young woman from the distant land that is pretty Egyptian-inspired. She sets sail for the city to stay with her cousin Kedar, who runs a shop there. However, during its introductory walking exposition dump, Kedar is murdered, and we only get away by running into a haunted mansion that the killers don't want to enter. After navigating the scary homestead where someone's assisting her, she comes face to face with this someone, and it's a weird, telepathic, magical guy called Malik. He then mentors Zaya and turns her into the Master Thief, because he wants her to get revenge on the people that murdered her cousin. That's certainly an odd thing to do. I hope nothing bad happens with him. And wow, they went really all out with this cutscene. Granted, this cutscene doesn't look as stylish as the Thief proper ones, but this is still a fan effort from the mid-2000s. This is a considerable amount of effort. We also get mission briefings here for each mission, and they look really good and as close to their source material as you could imagine.
I met with an associate of Malak's here in Sunnyport this afternoon and bought everything I need. So tonight, I'm going to try and sneak into their base of operations and steal both their wealth and their secrecy. If what I've learned is true, the smugglers have a hideout somewhere in an underground cave system. I'll sneak into their base through the secret cave entrance I saw earlier and see what I can find.
And since we have 13 whole missions here, 12 if you remove the prologue, this game proves to be a very large game, and one that you could easily convince someone is something official. Even the maps here are what you'd expect from Thief 2. So this is kind of like a Thief 2 2. The only area where this game really falters to me is that we don't get enough extra challenges for higher difficulties. We get some, but most of them are just get more loot, which won't really affect people that are playing to steal everything they can anyway. But that's not the worst issue in the world. In fact, as a fan project that could learn from the previous game's criticisms, and had no deadline set for publishing, they gave us a game with zero filler and missions that all hit. They even gave us a single tomb reading undead mission again, and while those weren't my favourite, Thief 2 was sorely lacking in this regard. But most striking of all, this game's story is really different from anything else. It's for the most part on a much smaller scale. This isn't the story of a thief who accidentally gets entangled into a plot to end the world. Instead, all Zaya wants at first is revenge, which starts off as her learning who wronged her. Then she'll orchestrate ways for them to be killed without putting herself in danger, which leads to her discovering the Mechanist servants, and she'll have to deal with Sheriff Truitt. She isn't trying to stop, she's just trying to save someone close to her that's caught up in all this. Zaya isn't a hero, nor is she legendary enough with connections in the city to get mixed up in all this. She's just an outsider, she's only been here for a year and all that time was training to be a thief. She discovers who the Hammerites are while on a mission, and her only living connection to the world right now is this mysterious man who trained her. And what a good job he did. He gave her a bunch of robust items like this one thing that lets you change the elements of your arrows. You'll unlock all of them over the course of the game, but the first one we get is my favourite. So we still have water arrows here, but if you use this item, all your water arrows will turn to ice arrows, and you can keep switching them back and forth as much as you want. But ice arrows not only freeze things like people or cameras or robots, it does the Majora's Mask thing where you can make temporary ice platforms to get to alternate routes so you can reach specific things out of place. All the elemental arrows will get an alternative by the end of the game, though none of them top the ice arrow for me. And the switching back and forth is something I never tire of, and because of its system it helps to not clutter the menu, and it gives each arrow extra uses. For example, if you want to freeze a Mechanist child in place, so then you can run up behind him and shoot him in the back twice with water arrows to disable him, that's 3 water arrows total. This system is great, and it means to put more thought into what you buy in the shops. The gas arrow becoming a combustion arrow, I used it a couple times. It destroyed all of this Mechanist security and that was fun. Though this game has other items that are used more like the EMP grenade for the same purpose, and that never crashed my game, whereas the combustion arrow did a few times. It certainly loved doing it in the hotel level. We even get confusion arrows that let you make enemies fight each other somehow. Even old weapons in this game have been recontextualized now. Mines, that thing that just explode and you barely ever used, they're now nature's lockpick. Take that, you game, you wanted me to grab a key for some reason. Holy shit, Garrett, you can't compete with Zaya's inventory. Sure, we don't have explosive frogs anymore, but we get spider eggs to kill and locust eggs to devour the flesh and completely hide all the evidence of the body here. Plus we can use water arrows to clean up blood now. This is all for the kinds of people who are pretty okay with murder, which I'm usually not when I play this game, but hey, options are nice. You may even need to use it sometimes because there are some heavyset characters that you can't pick up anymore, so do the humane thing and let locusts eat their flesh while they're unconscious. For me, as a pacifist of humans and a murderer of monsters, I was thrilled to see the glow up the zombies got here. Zombies still move slow, but now your sword can dismember them. Cutting off their arms is fun, but go for their heads especially, which won't kill them, but it prevents them from using an annoying new attack where they vomit on you, which hurts. But we don't just get zombies returning to this game, we get Burricks here, and I love him. Look, there's even some that are kept as livestock to be eaten. And we get deep Burrick lore by seeing their ancestors in a museum, Look at how giant that one is, look at his teeth, I love him. Our entire suite of basic items have all been remodeled, and what I find funny is that the blackjack, the thing that could probably do serious damage to a person's head, has been replaced by a fucking hammer. It only leaves people unconscious, but I don't trust this at all. I feel like all these people are dying within a day or two, especially with the kind of medicine they have here in Thief. But thanks to this hammer, we can get into a hammer battle with the Hammerites, and never mind, there's a stronger. Oh yeah, I should talk about the missions. The first one is set up for the whole story which I went into, but mission 2 is breaking into a museum, and I don't want to belittle Deadly Shadows, I love that game, and that museum level is my favourite one in that game, but well, this mission isn't even close to my favourite one in 2X, and I still prefer it to Deadly Shadows variant. It's a great setup mission that works excellently as an early game locale to rob, and it does wonders for the world building. I would believe that the city has museum exhibits on the Lost City, or even what pagan life is like. This is all genuine and feels personalised, whereas the mission I unfortunately have to keep comparing it to was a little guilty of just having generic paintings and statues everywhere. This also properly introduces us to the new faces and voice acting, which take a little getting used to, but I grew to love them. Except for these guys, their faces warp mid-attack, and it's not the best thing to see. But to really reinforce the marvel that this fan campaign is, there are hundreds of new models and thousands of new lines of dialogue, and it's almost on par with what Thief 2 actually offered, though that game did have ugly models and cheesy voice acting, so it's not hard to see why some random people could match it. But boy, they did a great job, and I'm really happy they have the right level of earnest and silly. This first mission is just here to test that Zaya has mastered her training. It doesn't have to connect to anything, but it still does because Zaya can see artifacts that she brought into the country, and they're on display now. When her cousin was murdered, those people took her ship and sold off all the valuables on it. The story is already beginning to play out even though we don't quite know it yet. After this mission, we get our first of a few city levels. Think the ones Thief 2 had, but a lot more fun to navigate, and lots of memorable smaller moments. It's kind of more like the rooftop level from Thief 2, where we get lots to do, and it really does feel like a city like that. This is fantastic and helps show the scope of this project. I have to reinforce that fans made this not too long after the actual game came out. This is all followed by what might be the most ambitious mission in the game. It starts off with us tailing some smugglers who killed our cousin, and this is all throughout a gloriously garish train station built by the mechanists. Still so many details here that I have to adore it. We even get to see a mechanist woman chastise the Hammerites for their exclusive policy of not letting women join.
Thy words are untrue, heathen. I have within me the great teachings of the Builder, though I sorely wish I couldst have learned them in this manner much sooner, and I would have, were it that your precious Hammerite order allowed women to join.
But why would a woman wish to join the Order? Thou can learn of the Builder by seeking out our sermons, and avoid all the embarrassments which can occur if thou were to become a Hammerite.
I wish to please the Builder as much as thee, perhaps more so. Thine old boys' club is no more Hammerite.
This really humanizes the mechanists more so than what we saw previously. Sure, they were run by a genocidal guy, but most of the members weren't actually like that. They just wanted to serve the Builder. This also helps add some believability to how the mechanists rose to power so quickly. The Hammerites were the old guard, whereas the mechanists were the wave of the future. We even see a Hammerite try to escort a woman away while misspeaking and accidentally dropping the Hammerite language.
Perhaps you'd like a little company. I could use a big, strong mechanist to walk me to the arrival area. You never know what kind of scoundrel is lurking around at this time of night.
Well, I suppose I can do that. Anything to assist you. I mean thee. Anything to assist thee, grand lady.
Oh yeah, and this is a flipping train station. This isn't something we ever saw on Thief, but it's within the realms of possibility that the mechanists could have made something like this. It's still very new technology and there aren't a lot of them. And this mod shows us the mechanists even have doorknobs that are shaped like gears. It's so cute, I love it. But after sneaking onto the train without paying for it, we get the second phase of this mission. We're on a moving train. What the fuck? This is not what you'd expect from this engine. You can run all throughout the carriages or jump across the top if you're boring, and we get lovely dancing animations. But then even after this, it's still not enough, as there's a mission that goes into a third phase. We leave the train in the coastal location of Sunnyport, a tourist location on the coast with an ironic name if you remember to enable the fog in the settings, which I didn't for my playthrough at first. Whoops. In fact, without the fog on, the train ride loses a lot of its majesty, but hey, at least you have to see how the trick worked. Fog was sometimes used for atmosphere in Thief 2, though it's something I didn't always enable. It's nice, but usually not a required addition, it's just for a little extra atmosphere. And it did break a level of Thief 2. But in Thief 2X, this is basically an essential thing you have to click. But here we get to see a snowstorm with very little visibility, whereas without it, it's a bright snowy environment, which is by no means bad. But look at that snowstorm, that's so much more impressive. We won't realise it for a while, but Sunnyport becomes a central location for the next handful of missions. And in a lovely touch later, sometimes bits of this map are reused in other maps so we can feel like one cohesive location. And it does that really well without feeling like padding or filler. Damn, what a mission. And while some time passes between this and the next mission is just beyond those borders where we ended this. We discovered the smuggler's hideout, and now we get to explore that full area, but under the cover of night. We're here to learn the names of those in charge, and to see if we can find any weaknesses to exploit with the smugglers, which we interpret eventually as, hey, the Hammerites, they seem pretty strong. Let's frame these smugglers for stealing something important to this very strong religious sect, and let's just see how that plays out. I'm sure you can imagine the end result. And to skip several levels ahead, we see that bloodbath as it happens, and yeah, that's what I expected to happen. But the next few missions in between these two moments are pretty nondescript, but they're by no means boring. In fact, they're exactly what you'd expect from more Thief 2, and they're great. A detail I love is that the next mission starts on the city streets, and we have to break into this Hammerite temple. There's a front door, a side door, there's a hole in the roof we can easily access from a nearby building. But best of all, if you look at that really tall wall, there is a little bit of broken fence up high, and we can stack a lot of boxes to make the most tedious way in, but I do it because it's funny. These devs think of everything. After this mission, we're onto the Hammerite tomb, with all the scary monsters and traps you'd expect. It's a welcoming change of pace. And even though it's probably my least favourite mission in this game, I prefer it being here than Thief's 2 approach of not doing anything like this. This is like the Boneyard, but better in like every way. Then we get another city that's maybe my favourite of this kind. It sees us break into a candy store that smugglers run as a front. It's this candy cane building we saw before in a previous mission. And then we need to break into that chapel again. But this time we have to use the underground sewer entrance because all the other methods are unavailable. This map is huge and it connects to all these earlier parts of Sunnyport. And after this, it's seemingly the climax of the story. We've finally gotten our revenge on the smugglers, but we learn a little more and the story has an extra act. Sheriff Gorman Truitt and the Mechanists, they're up to no good, and the next few missions are my favourite of the pack, and the focus is on all this. First up is a bar that also doubles as a brothel, and it lets us know that in this universe, people have Hammerite kinks that involve a mistress that punishes the naughty. We also see the Pagan Kink room, which I'm not going to comment on, especially not that Ape Beast costume. No, I'm just ignoring that. This mission also features naked women, both in the lively kind and the brutally murdered sex worker kind. If you're a 13-year-old boy playing this game, this is the only mission your parents will walk in on you playing. And this whole mission is set in a brothel that Sheriff Truitt visits under a pseudonym, and it's all based on a note you can read in Thief 2 that says he does this. Kind of proves that he's a hypocrite because he's against sex workers but he also uses them, and this mission does explore that. This is a wonderful slice of life mission, but it can't compare with the next one, which is a hotel for the richest people in town, and god, I love this. It's my favourite mission in the game. It brings back memories of Hitman missions like Tradition of the Trade, and also other Hitman missions like Tradition of the Trade, or that hotel level in Death to Spies. Every single stealth game needs a hotel level. This reminds me the most of the bank from Thief 2, which was one of that game's highlights. But security isn't as strict, but it's still stronger than anything else you've seen in this game thus far. But this is a huge open level with lots of entrances, and has rooftop access, and you get to see an everyday location that our universes have translate over to the Thief universe. I suspect a lot of people haven't been inside a mansion or a haunted tomb, but getting to explore a hotel or a bank is oddly comforting. This mission even gets to fulfill on the promise to blackmail something Thief 2 set up but we never got to follow through with.
I don't know! I didn't know they had names!
Did you know that they're people? They have families? They have feelings?
I don't know if I can help you. There are so many, and they only have numbers.
It just so happens that I've got some numbers too. And they show how much of the owner's money you've blown at the Overlord's fancy. I'm sure they would be very interested to see those numbers.
This is a great moment. Or you could botch the whole thing with Nature's Lockpick, whatever works with you. This mission also goes above and beyond everything because they add in a new type of guard. Guards that have guns. It might seem weird, but these are kind of technologically consistent. They're old-timey guns that shoot a single shot, and then the guards have to run away because it takes too long to reload. And boy, I love this as an escalation to the human guards, and it makes sense that a hotspot like this would have guards with the highest technology available. But we're winding up to the climax here. While the missions here in Thief 2X aren't as good as Thief 102's best, we haven't hit a single mission I don't like, so props to the team for completely sticking the landing. This also goes for the penultimate mission, an abandoned hospital that is also victim to that plague we saw in Thief 1. So once again, we have an abandoned area filled with the undead. This is our second horror focus level, and it's fine. Though I must say that even with 2X's attempts at horror, they never leave me that frightened. Maybe it's because neither of these missions have Hammerhorns, who are the real MVP of the series. And the new enemies are fine, but they can't compete. This is the final explorative mission, and it's followed up by an ending mission that's pretty linear and over too quickly. But hey, I still enjoy it more than the final missions of Thief 1 and 2 proper. It even does some cool fan service stuff, because we find out that this mission takes place at the same time Garrett was in the Truett estate. We even see a note from Viktoria saying she'll meet Garrett soon. Also, I lied earlier when I said Zaya didn't have to save the world, because this mission takes an immediate pivot into world saving with this final mission. Zaya was unknowingly an accomplice to that strange man who insisted she get revenge and trained her on being a killing machine. I can't believe he's evil, who could have seen that coming? It might seem out of nowhere, but at least we got an entire game focused on my favourite parts of Thief, the thieving stuff, and we only got the single mission that gets to do the usual disappointing ending part of Thief. It's easy to see why most Thief fans loved this back in the day, with the most vocal detractors just hating it because it started women. And while there are lots of individual missions from Thief 1 and 3 I'd want to play over some of the ones in 2X, this was such a consistently fun time that of these 4 games, it might be my second favourite. The quality is outstanding, and this feels like an official expansion pack to Thief 2, with the only red flags being the cutscenes aren't the usual Thief style, and the game over and mission complete screens of this green and black thing which was very early 2000s core. And also, this, like a lot of fan missions, redid the compass to look more normal, but be less immediately readable. So, when I say this is like an official expansion, I mean it's one of those officially licensed, but still third-party expansions that they used to do, but one of the good ones, I promise. So Thief 2X, this is the Duke Caribbean Life's a Beach of the Thief franchise. Oh yeah, the website, we even get to see downloadable wallpapers, and icons for LiveJournal, AIM, and MSN. What a dedicated team. They even have downloadable audio commentary of this game.
They actually teleported to the train, and this is the first time the player sees it.
And you don't want to see it without the fog on. Always have your fogging on. Your weather and fogging has to be turned on for the train to work.
Yeah.
These devs genuinely had so much passion. But everything I've talked about thus far was released before 2006, which is long enough ago that some people watching this video weren't even born yet. Thief has been dormant for a while in terms of major releases, just lots of fan missions, which while good, can't directly compete with Thief, or they do, but they don't quite have that same level of detail with things like the cinematics. As it takes a lot to make a fan mission feel like Thief proper. You basically need a whole team of people working on every little aspect to make this thing work. So for a while, Thief 2X was just the latest and presumably last in what some people would consider Thief proper. That was until 2023, 1 year ago at the time of speaking, where we got another full-scale fan expansion pack. But not only is it on the league of 2X, it exceeded it in a lot of ways, and just in time for the 25th anniversary of this franchise. Thief: The Black Parade isn't just my favourite set of fan missions, but this is my favourite Thief game. It delivers maps on a larger scale than anything we've seen before, and it leans heavily into the gothic horror. It's surreal, it's frightening, and the maps will make Thief 2s look like the smaller ones of Deadly Shadows. Everything about it is near perfect. Though its name is kind of an unfortunate coincidence, the FAQ states they didn't know that this name was being used by some other group. Oh well. This expansion is specifically that for Thief Gold rather than the more popular Thief 2. And in terms of story, it's a prequel set before the events of the first Thief game. We play as Hume, a man who just escaped from prison for thievery, and he returns to the city years after he last saw it and is astonished by how different things have become. But as you'd expect, he gets roped into things beyond his humble life. Unlike 2X or the majority of the ambitious fan works, this keeps the HUD and most of the item designs the same as before. It might seem initially lower effort because of that, but dismiss all those negative thoughts. This project was in development for around 7 years, and it shows. All the effort went into the necessary elements. Like this level design is second to none. We have fantastically presented mission briefings.
It looks like Dahlquist has an interesting job for me. There's a merchant in town called Monsieur Halliford, who owns a ramshackle manor in the south of Shalebridge. He fancies himself an art collector now, and possesses a precious vase with diamonds that Dahlquist wants to acquire.
And we even get cutscenes that look like the old games ones. The character banter is top-notch here, and they not only gave us moving horses and dogs, but we have squeals. I repeat, we have squeals. For everyone not intimately familiar with the cut content of Thief the Dark Project, these were sewer rats that had eel-like proportions. They got concept art but never progressed further than that. But these guys put them in here. There are also lots of really subtle changes you might not notice at first, like our protagonist isn't as overpowered when it comes to stealth as Garrett was, because this is a man who didn't get keeper training. We also get other small things like moss from moss arrows can now be expanded by watering the floor with water arrows. And NPCs get a few actions which will make them tougher for you, but they're also more perceptive in general. Plus there are some new items, just not as many as we saw in 2X. This mod was announced in 2016 with just 4 staff working on it, and that number ballooned to nearly double that by the time of the release. It was 7 people who did most of the work on this game, though the credits here are extensive and highlight all the extra help they had with things like voice acting, additional art, music, and basically every little thing they could get, most of which were from the Through the Looking Glass forums as well. The credits also begin with an acknowledgement that this game is dedicated to BBB and Lady Rowena, who were both 2 popular fan mission creators who unfortunately passed away during the long development cycle of this expansion pack. And given their legacy on the community and how tight-knit the best parts of this community are, you can tell how genuine this all is. Now to get to the missions themselves, we have 10 of them. That might seem like it's on the low side. Everything else I mentioned had quite a bit more than that, except Deadly Shadows, which had a lot of in-between moments of gameplay. But these missions are huge. You could maybe argue too huge, but to me they're perfect. The scale of these places continually impress me. Our first mission isn't a tutorial or a small-scale location to come to terms with things. No, it's a giant section of a city that dwarves every other attempt we've seen thus far. Bar none, My favourite level set exclusively in the city streets. It even has a horse. After that, it's a labyrinthine mansion surrounded by lots of city that gives us lots of ways in. The scale of this has to be seen to be believed. It even has plants everywhere because of the owner's pagan connections. His home is nonsensical, but it's practical. This isn't a death trap like Constantine's, he's just an eccentric rich guy, and I won't condemn his hobbies. He's allowed to have a pit into nowhere that looks like a 3D representation of Bart's influence. But this is mission 2. In most entries, this is your first real test after warming up, but you're thrown in the deep end here, and you'll be here for ages just finding every bit of treasure you can. It even ends uniquely, as when we return to the starting point, we're bonked on the head. We think we're done, but no. The story's being introduced to us, and we're forced to work for someone else now. Mission 3 sends us to a Hammerite temple, and it's on a whole new scale to everything else we've seen. It just never ends. It's perhaps most like Undercover, but without the undercover part of it. This chapel is home to lots of Hammerite artifacts. It has an alarm system in place too, and we get reminded that the Hammerites have a life outside of bludgeoning you to death. And the thing is, I love this level, but for many in the community, this is a low point of the expansion pack, and I kind of agree it's towards the bottom for me. But this is still one of my favourite Thief levels ever. This expansion pack is just that good. We're 3 for 3. My favourite city level, favourite mansion level thus far, and my favourite Hammerite location. Will this trend continue? Yes. Level 4 is fantastic, and on the surface, it seems like more of the Bone Horde from Thief 1, a map that's few people's favourites. We once again start off with a large chunk of city to explore, then we immediately see some other would-be thieves within this tomb, and they left their ropes and some notes here, so we know they can't be too far ahead. When we actually explore this underground tomb, it is enormous. And I'll stop saying that every level is big, because you get the point, every level is big. But this underground cavern is scary big, and it's just scary. It's very dark, and there's lots of monsters here. This map is once again a high point of the entire franchise for me. I love how it brings in a giant open space with lots of complexity, and it meshes that with all the horror that I wish Thief 2 had more of. Though it does include this fucking jump scares monster that sprints at you, and I hate it, and it scared me, and I'm glad there's a potion here that makes you very hard to see, because, this terrified me the first time I saw it. These devs were sick fucks. If you think this thing's a bit scary, wait until you see the gambling den, where people are making dogs fight. There's also a dude in one of these cages, and I don't like it. At this current stage, the game is taking ideas from before and supercharging them, and this care has extended to the different difficulties, which are now back to what Thief used to do proper. If you want to play on Expert, there's a lot of extra work you have to do, and some monsters are exclusive to Expert mode, so if you play on Normal, you won't pee your pants as much. This really incentivizes you to play on Expert if you can handle it. You don't want to do that tomb without the scary sprinting jump scare monster, do you? These scares are followed up with a mission that is a haunted house in the plague-ridden part of that city again. And not only does it have some of the best atmospheric horror we've seen in the series, this whole haunted house is the reward for making it there in the first place. Because you guessed it, we have a whole bunch of city to explore with lots of small buildings and everything, and I love it. And we get to jump from windows onto these large chains, and it's like this power fantasy of being a sneaky little guy that isn't scared of falling off to his death every time he goes near a ledge. You feel unstoppable. Then the game pushes you back into your place and reminds you it's time to be scared. Collect all these portraits in this ghostly manner, and these portraits all look like the cover of Say Cheese and Die. And once you have all of those, the game will gut punch you with its story. But given that this mod is quite a bit newer than all the other games that people will call boomer games for some reason, I'll avoid talking about the story too much, but here in Thief tradition it has a slow build-up. We're on mission 5 of 10 now, the halfway point, and we have a clear dividing line between Hume just being a dude trying to survive, to Hume being a guy who is actively trying to survive. This game fucking hates Hume. And the cutscene that follows this mission was genuinely Thief enough that it honestly made me forget that this wasn't some lost Thief game from the turn of the millennium. It's that good looking, and the talented staff here are masters of their craft. Even the NPC voice acting here is a step above 2x.
You been a guard here long?
Long enough.
Long enough for what?
Long enough to want to be working somewhere else.
I hate to sound like I'm praising them for every little thing, but these developers deserved it. But the next mission was a roller coaster of emotions for me. Initially, it's a tailing mission we're meant to follow some guy. Unlike all the other times we had to do that, we actually don't have to tail him. You're free to ignore him and just stumble onto the end location at your own leisure. This is fantastic for replays. Instead of following him through the city, you can just explore this really large chunk of city at your own pace and go for all the little items you want to steal. And it's beautiful to look around here because we get this gorgeous, foggy city that's combined with the smoke of the industry. Oh yeah, make sure you play this for fog. The whole city only has a few enterable locations, but they all feel wonderful to explore. We even get this really large Hammerite facility that's fascinating, but it's largely just set dressing for the main attraction of the level, the Keeper Lookout. And immediately I was disappointed because it's just similar to the one from Thief 3, but then I came around to it because of its dedication to that fact. And because this level isn't required to be small anymore, they got to do everything they wanted to bring series of tunnels and small rooms to life. We even get the weird space windows that the first game had in its trading level, which means to me, this expansion is more canon than Thief 3. The Keepers no longer feel like they're living in a claustrophobic shelter. This feels like it could be an actual refuge for them, thanks to the more freeing level design. But then, this game pulled a 180 and did the kinds of ridiculous fan service I didn't think they would do, and it made this level go from pretty good in my heart to a standout level for me that is honestly one of my favorites ever. We go to the Keeper's restricted library, and we can see the Hag while she's still incognito. If she spots you, she not only becomes a low-poly version of her monstrous form, she turns the statues to life and they come after you with their same chants from before.
Oh, there you are.
This is a prequel to the series, so it makes complete sense that she would be here, and it doesn't seem like fan service for the sake of it. If you really think about it, it would be weird if she wasn't here, but it's the kind of large amount of effort you wouldn't expect from most creators. And it's really nice to see this because Deadly Shadows is a game that quite a bit of the Thief community don't give the love and attention it should. The game's commitment to lore doesn't end here, however. This level establishes that the story involves the Hand. You know, that tiny group that was mentioned in a tiny bit of Thief Gold and were planned for Thief 2 Gold. Well, here, the devs are using that opening plot thread for their own story. And a major character of this expansion is someone who we saw as a corpse in a single level of Thief 2 if you explored thoroughly. These fans are really dedicated. There are lots of other moments that really show how this intertwines with pre-existing lore. There's too much to list. And this Keeper locale is followed up by my favorite mission in all of Thief. Full stop. This is my favorite. It's a lavish mansion with lots of secret pathways, large open spaces and security. And not only do we get security cameras that alert everyone and fail the mission if you're spotted, we get to see that guards can patrol with dogs. The devs even hid a little Easter egg here because you get an instant failure if you alert or harm the mansion owner. But if you knock him out quickly enough and grab him before the game forces you to load a save, they left a little message just for us. I hate to say it's my favourite level in all of Thief because this is the most Thief 2-ish level here, and that's probably why. It's also a nice taste of comfort that this game gives you before it pulls the rug out from under you. Following this, we get what I personally find to be the weakest proper mission in the pack, but it's still really good. This expansion has flirted more with horror than any of the other Thief games, even Deadly Shadows, and I would say, with this mission alone, this is the scariest Thief game. Mission 8 one-ups every attempt thus far to give us the definitive experience of horror for this franchise. It front-loads atmosphere with a trek through the forest that takes us to a destroyed outpost with only hints as to what actually happened. Then we plunge so deep into the unknown that looking up just reveals a black void. And it doesn't take long to find out you're not alone here, and I first found out with just hearing some footsteps but not being able to see what was near me. This is the most tense I've felt in the franchise. This team deserves a lot of praise because all the enemies that they made for this level, and there are a lot of them, they're all great in their own way and they feel like ancient evils that want nothing more than to be alone. And some of them in particular will probably haunt my nightmares for a while. This mission even triggered my arachnophobia. I'm pretty used to giant spiders in the series. They're blocks of polygons that I'm used to looking at and I don't mind them. But these devs added new twists to that formula that made me more scared of them than anything else, except maybe the scary horror shadow monsters that follow you like weeping angels. That all said, this is my least favourite thieving mission in this game, as I said earlier. It's very linear and doesn't feel as rewarding to explore as the best of these types of haunted locales. Also, for the second half of the level, it downplays the horror in favour of elemental dungeons that feel like the mage towers from Thief Gold, but a hell of a lot better than that level for what it's worth. Especially with all these new enemies like that Naga thing, I love it. But I find myself feeling two emotions for this mission. Genuine terror and boredom. It's by no means a bad mission, and I'm glad it's here. And I love how, at the end of this mission, we exit out to the forest, but the sun is rising. It's wonderful storytelling that signifies we're safe from the danger now. The game is wrapping up. We got the penultimate mission that starts with the most carefree attitude. It's a festival in an open city complete with drinking and live music, as well as dancing and even fireworks. So much work had to be done to get this all working, and you can feel the struggle. This mission chugs a little, and it was confirmed by one of the developers to be because of the open space itself and the details loaded in, rather than it being from the amount of actual spectacle. But hey, I think it's worth it, and it really only happens in the outdoor sections, most of the levels inside. And hey, that's what horses eat, and we get the glorious return of horses. Also, this weird thing, hey. The actual mission here is one of my favourites as well, and it's nice to see the mages be weird little guys in a more traditional setting rather than their own towers or some underground city. It serves as a near-perfect final thieving journey in an open environment, because after this, we get the traditional thief final mission that I don't care for. It's atmospheric as hell, and it has all these horrific monsters, but I'm glad was saved for this hellish finale. And I've seen some people say this final mission is especially bad, and worse than all the other final missions in the Thief series, and I disagree. This is maybe my second favourite ending of the Thief series behind Thief 3. It's not particularly amazing, but on atmosphere alone, it has my heart. The scary flesh monster alone makes this nice. Things end exactly as you'd expect, and it ties up everything with a lead-in to Thief the Dark Project, the next story in the canon. On its own, the Black Parade is also guilty of some of the sins I associate with most of the series. To me, the final missions are a hard act to land, and this is no exception. Though, like I said, I still think it's on the higher end of final missions. The Black Parade, warts and all, is my favourite Thief game, and almost every level in this sets a new standard for the series. And there are only two missions here I don't outright adore, and I think those two are high points for monster design and atmosphere in the entire series. So even though I don't love playing them, they still excel in some areas nothing else in the franchise can compete with. Fans have helped keep this franchise alive for 2 decades and counting, and I honestly don't expect another revival, especially with the previous one fizzling out and leaving fans burned. Thief as a series has officially 4 games, but only 3 that really matter, and with fan efforts, it's 5 great games, and a bunch of other fan missions that are also worth playing. Each of these games has their own strengths and weaknesses, but they nonetheless all feel like the same series and tell the expanded story of the city and its criminal underworld. Whether it be Garrett, Zaya, or Hume, whether released by an official studio and released in a box, or be it a free digital download made by the fans themselves, these are all Thief to me, and they're some of my favourite games ever made. So just to bring this all the way back to the beginning, I'm a little sad to know that the legacy of this pioneering series is to some people just a game from 2014 that very few people care about. Give Thief a go if you haven't. You watching this video right now haven't had the experience ruined by my recap, because the joy of a series is to play it and immerse yourself in the world. These games are readily available on Steam and GOG. Play them now. The mechanics of this game haven't aged a day, even though the visuals of these games certainly aren't the freshest. But play them now. And if you've already played the games, play them again. Never stop playing these games. Don't let anyone take you away from them. They love you more than anyone else ever will. Wow, that was a lot. I am never working on a video this time consuming again. Which is why next time I'm looking at Front Mission for WonderSwan, and Front Mission for Nintendo DS, and Front Mission for the Switch. If you thought I played the same game 3 times, you'd be wrong. I actually did it 4 times because I played the Super Famicom version with a fan translation just as a point of reference to compare everything. Oh, I hate myself, but watch that video too. It's a tactical game, you'll probably like it, I don't know. Patreon, subscribe on Patreon.